What if Naruto becomes an assassination specialist? Enjoy this video. Let's get 30 likes for part 2. 1:45 a.m. Somewhere in Kanahagakure there was a clear night sky over Konoha. The stars twinkling brightly, the crescent moon smiling down at the earth, and the cool breeze drifting through the air was a sure sign of good fortune for the Hidden Leaf Village. However, on this strand of air came the scent of foreboding, as a dark figure could be seen leaping across the village rooftops towards the very edge of the village area nearest the mountains. His form silhouetted the sky, but nobody took notice. Even for those walking around the streets thought it was just a bird. The relatively small figure leapt from one roof to another effortlessly, before stopping short of a series of houses bordering a small river weaving through this area. His eyes fell upon the bridge arching over it and, marking the next series of houses carefully, leapt forward, skipping on the bridge's railing and up onto the next series of rows. He traveled for another few hundred meters before becoming perched on the edge of another roof. Hidden away in the shadows, the young figure then glared down towards the entrance of what looked to be an estate built into the cliffside of the Hokage Mountains. The building was nothing too fancy or too dull. It had a nice, wide-open garden up front with plenty of foliage, and a perimeter fence surrounding the garden. To further the figure's observations, he saw that there were at least a dozen guards outside, and judging from the masks and black attire, he could tell they were root members. The figure watching them was short, wearing black trousers and sandals, a ninja mesh top, and over that a black jacket with a white fur collar, a hood, and it was zipped up. It also had a red flame pattern along the bottom rim, and the hood concealed the man's face almost completely. Even if the hood were to fall away, it would be useless to see his face, since he was wearing an umbu mask that was red on one side and white on the other, completely covering his face. He also had a huge scroll tied to his back, and several more slipped into a bandolier he wore around his waist. Furthermore, the man covered his entire outfit with a black cloak. To him, it was the perfect mask for his identity. Looking around where he was crouched, perched on the very edge of the roof, he began taking closer looks at the perimeter defenses and building. He saw from where he sat perched about 500 yards out that the fence was tagged with paper, indicating that the fence was rigged to detect anyone to set foot across it, and rigged to sound off alarms. He also noticed that the electric wires running into the building had tags hanging from them, as were the poles, and from closer inspection, a lot of the high points that could gain access to the roof of the building were rigged too. Browse just in Community Forum Beta's story search. We use cookies. Except anime/manga/anime/Naruto/anime/Naruto/. After studying the perimeter fencing, he then began to analyze the guards patrolling the area. For several nights now, he had been watching the guards move in and out on a regular basis, and had gotten a full report on their activities. After watching for a few minutes, he knew exactly how the schedule would run, and where the holes were. Knowing that this was his only chance to enter the vicinity and escape perfectly without anybody catching him, he knew he couldn't miss this opportunity. After all, this was a particularly important night. Nodding, the boy held his right hand up to his mouth, and from his thumb he bit down on it, drawing blood. Patting his fingertips with it, coating them in red, he placed it on the roof space in front of him, and with a puff of smoke, a falcon appeared. The summoned animal, quiet, looked around at its summoner and bowed to him. An exchange of silent words engaged them, with the figure reaching into his pouch behind him and pulled out a paper tag, slapping it onto the stomach of the falcon. He then bid it to be on its way, knowing it knew what to do. The falcon bowed and then took off, taking flight over the establishment. It swooped right over the fence, seeing that it didn't set off any alarms, before taking flight higher into the sky. Hovering near the most foliated areas, it let out a quick screech. The young male waiting on the rooftops nodded and, forming a hand sign, disappeared with a puff of smoke. A split second later, another puff of smoke appeared, not on the roof, but under the very seal that was placed on the airborne falcon. The young assassin appeared out of the smoke, free-falling and performing a few flips, before diving straight into the waiting bushes below. A pair of guards closed the entrance of the gate, caught wind of the rustling in the bushes to their left, and glanced at each other. "Go check that out," one of the masked root guards said. His partner nodded and walked over, drawing his sword from his sheath behind him. The dispatched guard disappeared into the darkness of the edge of the garden, stepping out of the light of the lamps and out of his partner's sight. Reaching the source of the supposed rustling, the root ninja then began to probe the bushes one after the other. He forced aside vines and cut away at the branches obscuring his view, looking around through the dark and thick undergrowth for any signs of life. It was then, just as he was leaning in to take a closer look at a peculiar-looking flower, it suddenly shot out at him with a hand, striking at his neck and pulling him in sharply and soundlessly. The only sound was the rustling of more bushes. The guard's comrade standing at the gate looked over when he heard the sudden sharp rustle of bushes and stepped forward. Unable to see anything, the guard then called for backup. 3 more showed up, and he pointed towards the bushes and trees. "Go find Eagle. We might have a situation." The guards nodded and drew their swords, rushing into the bushes. The guard watched from the sidelines through the dark, listening and watching for any signs of life. It was then, out of the darkness, he heard a light clang of a blade and suddenly a grunt, signaling trouble. The root guard stepped back and drew his sword out. He reached up to his headpiece and growled. "Blast it," but before he could do anything else, a shuriken shot out of nowhere and knocked his headpiece clear out of his ear, at the same time scarring his mask. He grunted in shock and was about to shout out for help, but was silenced. All he heard was a thud and his vision go blurry, and he felt a seeping, warm sensation escaping his neck. He reached up to his throat, unable to breathe as his own blood seeped out of the wound in his windpipe. Within seconds, he fell to the ground, only to be caught and dragged into the shadows by the assassin crouching behind him. With the bodies dealt with, the short, yet well-rehearsed assassin then began closing in on the building wedged into the cliffside. Reaching the edge of the garden close to the entrance, he began counting the remaining guards. There were 7 left, and he knew that he had to take them all out if he had a chance of escaping. Spotting one closing in on his position, he crouched further into the bushes, flicking his wrist. It was with that a blade shot out from under his right jacket sleeve, reflecting a bit of the light from its shine. "We use cookies. By using our services, you acknowledge that you have read and accept our cookies / and privacy / policies. Accept." The guard drew closer. Inside the estate hidden in the mountain, underneath a glass roof, there was a round conference room of sorts. The room consisted of a red and green trademark design, with large pillars, 3 floors with walkways visible, and on the ground floor, an oak-made, large round table with 12 seats. Most of these seats were empty, and the number of guards there were numbered to around 13 at the most, plenty enough for the 3 figures sitting at this round table. One of them sat in the upper-class seat, reserved for the head of this particular organization. He wore white and black robes, his right arm in a sling and a majority of his face and head wrapped in white bandages. Furthermore, as understandable for his age, the man also had a walking stick, and the only working side of his body was his left side. The 2 other people sitting at the table in seats across from each other were the 2 of the most recognized of the village elders, Hamura Mitokado and Koharu Udatane, who were looking upon the head of Root with great intent. "Well, Danzo," the elder Hamura began, "what do you plan to do with the container of the QB? He is, after all, an important asset to this village," Koharu stated. "His isolation from the villagers should help you to be able to acquire him from the Hokage's circle. The people will hail you as the hero of Kanahagakure for finishing off the Yandame's handiwork. Only in reality, you will be taking the little demon under your wing and train him to become the weapon he is supposed to be. Getting rid of the child will be easy. It's just pasting the blame on the person that is the problem." The leader, designated Danzo, lowered his head as he took the elder's words to heat. However, he disregarded their words for the time being and sighed. "The Hokage constantly keeps an annoyingly close watch on the boy. He's even gone as far as to paste not only Anko Mitarashi on the boy's watch, but also Irika Yumino as well as extra protection. Irika poses no threat to the progress of this village," Koharu stated. "He is but a pawn, just like the other Chunin. It's Anko Mitarashi that's the problem," Hamura finished. Danzo nodded his head. "Unfortunately, I cannot make a move to get the boy, or I'll be caught. Hiruzen Sarutobi has already got enough eyes on me as it is. I'm assuming he's taken into account some of the rumors floating around the top." "Please define rumors?" Koharu queried. "As in, the situation back during the war in Amigakure, when I attempted to recruit the assistance of Hanzo." "Ah, that one," Koharu said, looking over at Hamura. "It's a shame though," Danzo said, lowering his head. "Those mongrel rebels are causing too many problems for him. Now we barely hear from Amigakure at all." "What of the info detail from your spy?" Koharu asked. "Unfortunately, I have not heard from him since. All contact with him has been severed," Danzo said, looking up with a grim look. There is the possibility that he has been either captured or killed. However, whether my spy is dead or not is of little consequence. There is something going on in Amigakure, and I intend to find out what it is. Could it possibly be civil war related? Last I heard, Hanzo and his forces were involved in a war with the populace. Perhaps, Danzo said calmly, but there has been little or no chatter to support this. Amigakure's borders are a strict no-go zone, completely sealed off. But what of your plans for the QB? Hamura asked. We use cookies. By using our services, you acknowledge that you have read and accept our cookies and privacy/policies. Except Danzo looked over at him. I intend to bide my time till the right moment, the old warhawk said. Presently, the little bundle of energy is proving to be a nuisance around Konoha. Reports from my overseers say that he is causing much havoc for the villagers, befouling the Hokage monuments and making a mockery of what this village stands for. It's starting to become a real errant. The demon is just a little troublemaker. He can cause no harm as of yet, Koharu said. The Hokage should keep a tighter leash on it, Hamura stated, earning a nod of agreement from Koharu. Unfortunately, the Hokage is continuing to make it a point that the boy is nothing more than that, a little troublemaker, Danzo said. He is currently attending the academy and scoring at a rather unsatisfactory level. Grades at average, progress hindered. No genius, of course, but in spite of his incompetence, he is still the container of the QB and must be treated in high discussion and must be controlled. Little monster, nothing more than a kettle about to boil over. Before any more words could be spoken, there was the sound of shattering glass overhead, and suddenly, a body came plummeting down from the ceiling, landing with an ear-splitting crash right in the center of the table. The very impact caused it to leap off the ground about a foot, and shocked the elders and surprised Danzo. When the body came to rest, it was revealed to be one of Danzo's root guards, dead with a kunai lodged in his head. Danzo gritted his teeth and rose to his feet, looking around. We've been infiltrated, he yelled. Guards! Just as the guards were gathering at the railing, ready to come to Danzo and the elders' aid, there suddenly came a rain of shadowy figures from the ceiling above. Emerging through the massive hole in the skyline, the figures leapt through the air, straight for each corresponding guard. The solid figures landed one after another beside or in front of every guard on the upper and lower floors in sight. The guards leapt back in surprise, drawing swords and ready to strike. But before any of them could, each of the small figures dressed in black went up in flaming balls of fire. The explosions rocked the very foundations of the estate, disintegrating a couple of the root ninja and blowing apart the others. Blinded by the onslaught of explosions and caught up amidst the blasts, Danzo, Hamura, and Koharu remained where they were, holding their ground. It was when the explosions faded and the smoke lifted they looked around to find that all the guards in the immediate area have been dispatched. Danzo frowned and, from his cane, drew a straight-bladed sword, looking around for any more attackers. However, what he failed to notice was that the corpse that had fallen from the ceiling before had a seal tag placed upon its chest. So, just as Danzo was turning on his axis, a puff of smoke exploded from the dead root ninja's chest, and once it cleared, it revealed the crouching assassin, glaring directly at Danzo. The two village elders spotted him first, but before either of them could react, the unknown assassin threw his arms out towards them, flicking his wrists, and suddenly, clusters of shuriken flew out from under his sleeves, hitting the elders like targets on the range. They were dead before they even hit the ground. Sensing the assassin behind him and kill the elders, Danzo spun around, performing a few quick hand signs before slashing out with his blade at the attacker. A stream of wind escaped his sword, extending the blade's attack indefinitely as he made the horizontal slash. The assassin, however, saw the attack and crouched flat down onto his stomach on the table, letting the attack pass over, before throwing his right arm forward. Another cluster of shuriken flew from his hand at this, and flew straight at the old warhawk. Danzo readjusted his blade and slashed downwards, effectively knocking aside some of the shuriken and attempting to kill the intruder at the same time. The assassin, however, pushed off of the ground and leapt to the side, spinning through the air in rapid succession. Just as the wind blade came down, we used cookies. Accept and struck the table, destroying it in a hail of splinters and dust. Danzo suffered a couple of scars from the shuriken he didn't deflect, thrown by the assassin. He readjusted his attention and glared at the boy, slicing through the air with his wind blade again down at the short man. The assassin managed to leap through the air again, this time retreating. Flipping through the air, the assassin flung his hands through the air, sending a third barrage of kunai at Danzo. Danzo leapt out of the way, gritting his teeth as he watched the assassin gain distance, landing on the second story on the railings of the above walkway. The remaining elder growled and slapped his hands together again in another series of hand signs, inhaling air quickly before throwing his upper body forward and across, letting loose a series of wind trails from his mouth, which sliced through the air, straight at the assassin. It tore up the second-story walkway, effectively clouding the whole area with smoke and seemingly consuming the assassin, sending him to his doom. Danzo breathed out and in, catching his breath and frowning up at the second story, seeing the dust and debris continue to rain down from his technique. Scanning the area, he saw that there was no more presence to be weary of and lowered his head. Sheathing his sword away, he confirmed that the battle was over. Sighing, the old man prepared to make his departure, turning on his heel and intending to head back to HQ and attend to this new problem. However, when he turned and his eyes fell upon the shadows near the entrance, he stopped in his tracks and his expression showed his slight surprise when he saw the familiar silhouette of the assassin standing on the ledge right above the entrance. He was standing at an angle that would have deemed him invisible to the naked eye. Upon being spotted, the assassin stepped over the ledge and dropped to the ground floor, landing in a crouched position and a light thud. When he did and rose to his feet, Danzo furrowed his brow and was about to draw his sword when he suddenly detected another presence beside him. Looking to his right, he saw another, or shocking enough, the same assassin step out from the shadows, followed by another, and another, and another. Soon, he was surrounded by over a dozen more assassins, all wearing the same clothing, and was the same height. He looked around him, seeing that he was surrounded by copies, and smirked. He adjusted his grip on his sword. Nothing more than shadow clones. In a swift, lightning-fast movement that was impossible for a man of his age to perform, Danzo spun on his heel and drew his sword, a loud whip-crack of wind sounding and ripped through the air, striking many of the clones and wiping them out. They all perished in puffs of white smoke as the trail of wind emerging from the sword slashed through the air and cut through them one after the other. Stopping mid-spin, Danzo once again adjusted grip and performed several hand signs. Once completed, he spun around fully, slashing his sword across and effectively scarring the inside of the building, and killing the rest of the clones with a final wind slice. They all went up in puffs of smoke, with an explosion of debris to follow from the old man's attack. "You'll have to do better than that to defeat me, assassin," Danzo called out, straightening his stance and looking back towards the entrance, only to find that his opponent had vanished. He looked around, trying with difficulty to try and find his attacker. "I've braved many conflicts in many countries over my years as a ninja of Konoha, and have learned many techniques. It'll take more than a clone jutsu to get the better of me." It was then, when the dust cleared again, that Danzo was faced again with another onslaught of clones emerging from the shadows. Only the numbers have beyond doubled. Surrounding him on all levels of the building, Danzo saw hundreds of clones standing, perched or sitting around him casually. He was surrounded and effectively closed in by a mass shadow clone technique, which made him raise his eyebrows in surprise. "Mass shadow clone jutsu, eh?" he curiously stated, looking around. "Well, 1,000 more just isn't going to cut it." Slowly raising his sword-wielding arm up and, with the pommel of his sword's handle, pushed up one of the many bandages covering his hidden eye, Danzo revealed his secret weapon. It was underneath the bandages he concealed a 3-tomoed Sharingan, immediately setting it to glare directly at the masses of clones surrounding him. Very well then, except performing a brief variety of more hand signs, Danzo then took in a deep breath and, with one swift movement, threw his upper body forward once again. Fire style. Grand fireball technique. The next attack left his lips with a loud boom and a rush of hot air. In merely a few seconds, a massive ball of flames escaped his lungs and quickly spread throughout the room. The old warhawk himself guided the technique, sending it spreading into the masses of clones, obliterating one after the other, and directing the flames in every possible angle. From here, he performed another variety of hand signs and, increasing his range, spun around and performed yet another fire style technique in a blink of an eye. Fire style. Phoenix flower technique? Danzo shouted, smaller balls of fire shooting out from his lips this time, targeting individual groups of shadow clones one after another, sending them into oblivion like the rest of them. He kept spitting out fireball techniques one after another with absolute precision, eventually coming down to one last assassin standing by the entrance. For this last one, he directed one last grand fireball technique, only to have the assassin raise his right hand and produce what appeared to be a glowing ball of blue chakra. The swirling ball struck the fireball technique head-on and dispersed it in a blink of an eye. As the flames dispersed, Danzo saw that the last assassin was still alive, and easily assumed that it was the real one. In their wake, they had completely destroyed the conference hall, burning walls and scarring the entire room. The entire structure was left crumbling and ablaze amidst the destruction. It was a miracle this place was still standing. Danzo smiled, seeing his opponent still alive. He clapped his hands together slowly. "Oh, exceptional, absolutely exceptional skill for a common assassin," Danzo exclaimed in his stoic voice, showing no hint of emotion whatsoever. He lowered his hands, watching as the assassin stepped forward a bit from the shadows. "I appraise your abilities to manipulate chakra so well. You truly are something more." The assassin flicked his left and right wrists, two short blades suddenly shooting forth from under his sleeves at the wrists with audible slicing sounds. Clenching his fists, the young male slowly proceeded to continue forward, intent on finishing the old man once and for all. All the while, he listened to him talk. "You've coordinated your techniques well. Skill like that would be very useful en route," Danzo stated, lowering his head a little. "How would you like to join me, assassin? Together you and I will be able to take Kanahegakure from the Hokage and make this village a better, safer, and more just society. I can make you a viable asset of my organization." The assassin stopped in his tracks, looking up and taking a closer look at his opponent. Considering his observations quickly, he then stepped back into the shadows. "No? Then perhaps a deal then? Name you price," Danzo offered. Frowning, the assassin flicked his wrists again, his blades retracting. This sight made Danzo smile, but it struck him a little curious as he watched the short figure reach for his right sleeve and adjust something concealed underneath it. But it looked as though he was just fixing his sleeve and nothing more. "I can give you anything you want, maybe offer you some suitable accommodations, or a certain amount of ryu. Just name it." Stepping forward, the boy raised his right arm upwards towards Danzo and with his left, gripped the trigger hidden underneath his sleeve with his finger. Suddenly, with a pull of that trigger, the barrel now protruding from under his sleeve went off with a loud bang that ricocheted around the hall. Danzo let out a loud oof of discomfort and staggered back as the air was knocked out of him. With his steps of agony, the man looked down at his stomach to see that the assassin had unexpectedly fired with some sort of device, a kunai, at an extremely high velocity. It had impaled him straight in the stomach, with blood already beginning to seep out. Without knowing exactly what the assassin had used to hit him, the warhawk collapsed to the ground with a loud thud. We use Cook as dead within seconds, his cane and sword clattering to the floor, joining him. "By using our services, you acknowledge that you have read and accept our cookies and privacy policies. Accept." The assassin lowered his arm, content with his job and adjusting his sleeve to cover his kunai gauntlet. With a frown, he walked forward, coming to stand next to Danzo's lifeless corpse. No lingering shred of pity or any signs of emotions could be seen on him, mostly due to the mask, but his body didn't rattle or tremble at all. The assassin just stood silently and glared down at the old man. Shifting a little, the short man glanced down at his shoulder, where he saw a trickle of blood escape a tear in his coat. He ran a thumb over it and found that he had been cut by Danzo's air release technique. The jutsu had left quite a gash in his side, but it was to be of no consequence. Ignoring it for now, the assassin turned back to his kill. Without hesitation, he rolled the old man over, seeing his Sharingan lying still in its socket. Proceeding to extract it, the young assassin knelt down and simply took the Sharingan from its user. It wasn't messy, it was just a clean push and pull. He placed the eyeball into a water flask from his pocket and sealed it. Afterwards, he then took the old man's cane and, sheathing it onto his back and pocketing the Sharingan, turned on his heel and began to leave. However, the assassin did not forget to clean up the mess he had made and tossed a kunai with an explosive tag attached to it straight up into the ceiling. Just as the assassin exited the facility through the front doors, the bomb went off, causing the unstable roof, as well as most of the cliffside to come cascading down onto itself, burying the entire site. The assassin didn't even look back at the explosion or the avalanche of rubble, only raising his right arm to allow his falcon to land onto his shoulder. He pets it in congratulations and allowed him to fly off, freeing him for a job well done. That very next morning, the local ramen bar was surprisingly quiet around this time. Much more disappointed than usual, the owners expected to be having a lot more customers than one this morning, since they were, after all, offering a new breakfast special ramen that was both healthy and nutritious. However, the only people they managed to attract with this new sale were Irika and Naruto, but that was about it. The only person sitting at the counter at present was their favorite, spiky-haired blonde, who was now gorging on a delectable bowl of a special morning miso ramen. Tucci and Ayam both stood at the counter and smiled as they watched the short bundle of energy consume his third bowl this morning, before grinning up at them happily with squinted eyes. Slow down Naruto, you'll choke, Ayam exclaimed. Remember, savor the flavor. Let it rest in your mouth before continuing its journey down your throat. Tucci told him. It has to go down in luxury. Otherwise you will end up with an unpleasant stomach ache in the foreseeable future. Oh, don't fret, old man, Naruto said, wiping his chin of some excess ramen broth. I know exactly how to savor my ramen. It must be treated with the very dignity it was created for, to be eaten and enjoyed. You must hold it in the highest respect, and let it go down remembered, by gorging on it mercilessly and swallowing it without hesitation. That's my way of the ramen. Ah, good one, kid, Tucci exclaimed, taking the pot of boiling noodles and assorted ingredients from the stove, and carefully pouring another bowl full into Naruto's empty one. Here, have another one on the house. Thanks, old man, the boy exclaimed before once again gorging on noodles. He was careful not to splatter any on his black, fur-collar jacket, or strain his right arm that was wrapped in a few bandages. It was while he was dining gracefully on his meal did Ayam fully take note of the bandages around his arm and pointed it out. Her father went off to do some of the dishes, and allowed her to keep an eye on their favorite customer. Man, this is good, Naruto said, a piece of noodle and some broth sticking to his cheeks. Hey, Naruto-kun, what happened to your arm? She asked, blinking in surprise. Did you hurt yourself? It must have been a pretty nasty wound for it to be bandaged up so much. Naruto looked up at her briefly and then towards the area of his arm where the joint met the shoulder. He smiled and looked back up at her, grinning. Nah, don't worry about it. I just fell out of a tree while training. It's no big deal. Ayam sighed and smiled at him in relief. That's good, Naruto-kun. But just try to be careful while you're training. Okay. Browse just in Community Forum Beta Story Search we use cookies. Yeah, Naruto exclaimed, giving her the thumbs up. I'll be careful. He then dug back into his meal a second later. His boisterous smile and happiness made Ayam giggle, who then headed off to do some her other duties. Unknown to her, Naruto took a quick glance at her over the edge of the ramen bowl his head was ducked into, the angle at which his head was placed sending an overcasting shadow that concealed much of his eyes, but revealed it in a different light. In his stare, there was a significant change, like a mask had just been removed by the very child these eyes belonged to. They were no longer glistening with their usual happiness. They were dark, drawing in the shadows and creating an eerie reflection, with the sapphire gleam turning into a slightly duller shade of blue, with rings of fatigue appearing as ringed bags beneath his eyes. These weren't the eyes of a human. No. They were the eyes of a tired child. Eyes of a raved dog. I'm glad you don't know me that well, Ayama-chan, the boy thought in a faraway voice, before turning back to his food and beginning to gorge on it again. He downed it in the next several minutes, and sighed happily, licking his lips. Yummy! That was so good! Ayam smiled over at him from the cashier area, where she stood clearing up some of the notes from the desk. Well, I'm glad you liked it, Naruto-kun, she replied, shrugging. My dad makes the best ramen in the entire village. It's him that you should be singing your praises to. You make great ramen too, Ayam-chan, Naruto exclaimed. Ayam blushed and rubbed the side of her cheek with her hand bashfully. Well, I don't make it that good, Naruto-kun. Of course you do, Naruto said, leaping off of his chair, pulling from his pocket several bills. He handed them over to Ayam and nodded to her. I've got my genin exams today. Wish me luck. Okay? Of course, why wouldn't I? Ayam replied, smiling kindly down at the boy who smiled back. Good luck, Naruto-kun. I know you will do well. Thanks, Ayam-chan, Naruto shouted with a wave as he left the shop. Bye, old man. Thank you for the ramen. See ya at lunch, kid. Tucci's voice followed after as Naruto began jogging up down the road towards the Ninja Academy. He set himself a fair pace, which was pretty fast for a boy of his age, but not a bit least a surprise due to his occupation and whatnot. He continued his run, past passing by individual villagers, as well as small groups of people along the way. Many of them watched him run by, whereas some gave him dirty looks behind his back. The yellow-haired youngster ignored them and pushed on, going so far as to gently shove by people to keep up his pace, calling out sorry to them but not stopping, so as to not waste time. Eventually he reached the point where he could see the academy, about a mile down the road, and smirked, only to feel a familiar presence come up beside him and glance to his left. When he did, he saw a very familiar face running right beside him, wearing a green spandex uniform with orange legwarmers, as well as bearing black, bowl-cut hair and very big eyebrows. Naruto raised an eyebrow when he saw the boy also wearing silver shackle live accessories on his wrists and ankles with marking on their sides, indicating that they were weight seals. The boy turned and grinned at him. "Why, if it isn't my good friend, Naruto? How are you this fine and beautifully painted early morning?" the boy exclaimed in question. Naruto smirked back at him, continuing his run. "I'm fine, and a good morning to you too, Lee," Naruto replied, nodding to him. "Going for an early hour run? Oh yes, yes indeed. As always. Good to see you're still keeping in great physical fitness." It was after the two of them had been running for several more yards in silence did they both smirk at each other and immediately pick up the pace. Side by side on equal ground, the two of them gained speed, dust up hurling behind them as they shot down the road at an unbelievably fast pace. They passed people by, who watched in shock as two blurs, one yellow and one green, shoot past them. "To the academy, Naruto-kun," Lee yelled, picking up the speed. "I will beat you to the gates this time. Not on my watch, bushy brows," Naruto yelled back, gaining even more speed. The two of them were moving so fast that it looked to them that they were gaining tunnel vision. However, it was all due to their speed and eye focus, and with the increase in their speed, they continued to move down that tunnel. The academy drew nearer and nearer, and both of them were rushing at it with all their might, panting and gritting their teeth. It was then, as soon as they were within reach of it, they both skidded to a halt, uphurling more dirt and dust before stopping just short of the gate. Lee then turned on his heel and began running in a different direction, waving back at Naruto, who took a moment to watch his friend depart. "It was a tie this time, my friend," Lee exclaimed. "Till next time, when I challenge you to a marathon run around the village. Can't wait, bushy brows," Naruto called back, waving at him till he was out of sight. Once Lee was gone, Naruto headed into the academy, hands in his pockets and a smile on his face. However, he dipped his head so that his eyes became overshadowed, masking the true emotions reflected in them. It was dropping his usual cool and happy mask partially that allowed him this breather. Boy, what a night. Thank the QB for his rapid healing powers, Naruto thought, moving his right shoulder a bit to adjust the tension. Must have been one hell of a jutsu, but I'm just glad that I finally have those old bastards off of my case. Permanently, his fur collar black jacket with red flame patterns shifted as he pulled his right hand out of his pocket, pulling out a kunai and tossing it, so that he held onto the blade and glanced down at the handle. There, he saw the familiar seals of the secret new jutsu and technique he had developed and had used on several occasions, but only for emergencies. He furrowed his brow and shrugged, pocketing the weapon back into his orange pants pocket. He adjusted his arms again, his jacket parting slightly down the zip area to reveal an athletic chest and torso pressed up against the tight netting of his mesh shirt. "I just want to get this thing over with, goy!" After working his way through corridor after corridor, he eventually arrived at his homeroom and entered. Shaking his head, he looked up to see that the classroom was partially filled with students, all of them sitting or standing around, talking to others. A few eyes gazed at him as he entered the room, and he took his seat in the center, second row. He groaned and sat down, rubbing his forehead. "Ugh. Should have slept in. You're telling me. You look awful." Another voice spoke up from beside the seated blonde. He looked to his left to see one Shikamaru Nara looking at him with a raised eyebrow, fingers laced where he sat propped up, obviously having tried to doze off before. Naruto blinked as he looked at him, reaffirming his usual mask of deceit and smiling. "Well, I'm not exactly the type to wear makeup, aren't I?" Naruto replied to his earlier comment. "It's not like you're looking any better though." "Duh. I always look like this," Shikamaru replied, running a hand through his pineapple-shaped hair, scruffing it up a bit close to the ponytail. "It's too troublesome trying to do your hair in the morning. Spare me a moment," Naruto said with equal exhaustion, while holding up his right arm to show him the bandages around his arm. "I just got up after one hell of a training session last night. It was a real mess. I tell ya. Shikamaru shared the bandages a glance, before looking up at Naruto's eyes. You know, if you spent more time studying than training and honing in on your techniques, then perhaps you might stand a better chance of balancing out your practical and literary scores a bit, and pass with at least dull colors. Oh yeah, well you're not doing too hot yourself, buddy, Naruto rebutted in a cocky tone. Last I checked you were failing in both practical and examination. TSK, whatever, Shikamaru said, resting his chin on folded arms and lying out on the desk in front of him. It's too much of a drag. I say go with the flow, get the best with what you got and try scoring high. Well, if you can bother to reach high. My god, Naruto thought, giving Shikamaru a highly animated look of sympathy and disbelief. I have never met anyone with a level of motivation as low as Shikamaru, and on top of that, 100% laziness. How do you think you went in yesterday's written examination? Shikamaru asked, surprisingly still awake where he sat, with his arms and head on the table. Why we use cookies. By using our services, you acknowledge think YGE that you got a good mark. You have read and accept our cookies, /cookies/ and privacy /privacy/ policies. Except, oh, I'm sure you'll be surprised, Naruto exclaimed, resting his feet up on the desk and putting his hands behind his head. He let out a sigh and smiled up at the ceiling. I just want to become a genin today. That's all I've got written down on my schedule. Same here, Shikamaru barely replied, earning a tick mark to appear on Naruto's head. What a slacker. For the next half an hour, students filed into the class one by one, till the entire room was filled and every single seat was occupied. Shortly after the bell rung, Irika Yumino himself stepped into the classroom, carrying with him a folder containing the class's results. With a smile on his face, he placed them out on his desk and then turned to the class, standing before them in front of the blackboard. Morning class, the young Chunin exclaimed, clearing his throat and adjusting his headband a little. I'm pleased to announce that, upon checking and marking all your exams myself last night, I have determined from the results that all of you have passed with flying colors. Except for Naruto, a smart aleck classmate, obviously Kiba's voice from what Naruto could tell, called out, dead last to the end, am I right? This got quite a few laughs from the rest of the students, with Naruto furrowing his brow and glaring daggers at a group of them to his right, who immediately shut up at the sight of him. The way Naruto angled and projected his glare caused them to shake a little at the look in his eye. Actually, Kiba, Irika said, rubbing his forehead with the back of his left hand. Naruto, in spite of his efforts over the years that has given him only, excuse me, satisfactory marks in the written exam, has passed it with full marks. There was a deathly silence, and Naruto grinned and glanced over at Shikamaru with a cocky look on his face. The Nara boy looked back at him and nodded, his expression easily showing his defeat. No way, not in this lifetime. How can the dead last in the class get full marks? He's a loser. A loser doesn't score that high. Well, guess again, kids, Irika replied, sharing a small grin with Naruto and glancing up at the rows of students. Apparently, Naruto has a lot of hidden potential in him. I expected a lot from him this year, and obviously, from this written exam, he surprised even me with his results. Geniuses aren't just descendants from great clans. All of you have to learn that with hard work and studying, you can achieve greater than even a well-respected member of a genius family. Not to mention, it is much more fun not training a genius, a quote I believed one of the three great Sannin used. He gave Naruto the thumbs up, who returned it before turning towards the rows behind him. Seeing all eyes on him, the spiky-haired blonde flipped them all the finger, before turning around and reaffirming his attention on Irika. My congratulations to you all, Irika exclaimed. You've all done very well. I am proud to call you my students. He then turned towards the board behind him and pulled out a piece of chalk. But the exams are not over yet. Now that the written exam has been completed, it is time to commence with the practical exam, and that means performing the basic techniques and skills that a ninja is required in the field in order to survive. Irika wrote on the board, practical exams. First stage, Henjutsu. Nodding, Irika turned around and smiled. If I have taught you well, and you all have practiced very hard, you should perform adequately. Now if you will all. Suddenly, the door flung open, and a familiar, pale pink-haired Chunin dashed in, panting slightly. Oh, sorry I'm late, Irika. I got held back by Asuma. The students watched as Mizuki joined Irika at the front, and the two Chunin shook hands. That's quite all right, Mizuki. We were just getting started. Great, The Chunin then leaned in, holding up a hand to Irika's ear and whispered, "So, how is Naruto doing?" "We use cookies. By using our services, you acknowledge that you have read and accept our cookies, /cookies/ and privacy/policies. Except fairly well actually, he passed with full marks on tactics, mathematics, literature, history, and techniques." Irika replied back, before stepping forward and facing the class. He just missed a rather surprised and annoyed look from his fellow Chunin, but he hid it away quickly so not to arouse suspicion. However, this look was not missed by Naruto, who was at this moment glaring at the other sensei whom he did not take any liking towards. "Okay class, now that Mizuki has joined us, it is time to commence with the first stage. I would like you all to line up in front of me from left to right, and when I come up to each of you, I want you to perform a standard henge jutsu of me," Irika said, using his pen to draw out an invisible line in front of him. Quickly, the students filed out of their rows and down to the front, lining up side by side at arm's length from each other across the floor. A lot of them were still throwing disapproving looks at Naruto, especially Kiba, Ino, and several other students. The boy ignored them and took his place between Choji and Shikamaru. The Akimichi boy smiled at him, and they both put their fists together as a sign of respect. "Nice going there, Naruto," Choji exclaimed. "You too, Choji," the young male replied. "Okay, first up, Shino Aburame," Irika said to himself, starting at the end where the boy stood quietly with his hands in his pockets. The Chunin went down the line to one student at a time, with Mizuki watching from the sidelines. Irika watched as each student performed the technique, marking them for quality and correctness. He would often advise the students one after another to put the pouch on the right side, or trim the hair a little, or fix the scar up. Other than a few of these, a lot of the students performed them perfectly, even Naruto when he was asked to perform it. He then even performed a reward technique at the end where he hinged into a naked female with blonde hair and whiskers, knocking out both Irika and Mizuki from blood loss, as well as several of the boys in the class, postponing the exam for extra 10 minutes as the fallen took some time to recover. Eventually, they were all back on their feet and could continue. Once the last of the students had performed the henge technique, Irika then rubbed off of the board and wrote in, "Second stage, replacement jutsu." Irika turned and grinned at his students. "All right, class, the next test is to see if you can all perform a standard replacement jutsu. As you know, this technique can be life-saving in the heat of battle, and can also dub in an inanimate object to take your place when you are being attacked or want to avoid being attacked. So, remain as you are, and I will come around to each of you." And the process restarted, the students performing the replacement technique one at a time, grabbing whatever object was closest to them, and replacing their physical selves with that object. On a majority of the techniques, the students replaced themselves with sharpeners, staples, chairs, and even Sasuke replaced his body with Irika's desk. Eventually, it came down to Naruto, and the boy stepped forward. Irika nodded to him for the get-go, while a lot of the students watched with smug grins on their faces to see if the dead last could pull off another lucky one. "PFT, what a joke," Ino muttered to Kiba. "No one can do better than Sasuke-kun. I bet you the loser will screw it up. I'll bet 10 Ryu on that," Kiba replied. Naruto smirked, hearing the murmuring flow over the students, and slapped his hands together into a single hand sign. Somewhere along the line of students, a familiar purple-haired girl, who was twiddling her fingers together nervously, smiled as she watched her Naruto prepare to perform the technique. "Come on, Naruto-kun. You can do it," she thought. Suddenly, Naruto disappeared in a puff of smoke, just like every other student before him, and in his place stood an inanimate object. Well, if you could call it an object. Sitting, or rather, standing in Naruto's place, head down and an orange book flipped open in his hand, stared upwards a rather startled and befuddled Kakashi Hatake. As the smoke cleared, the students and teachers who had watched Naruto perform the technique looked on with rather shocked expressions as the Jonin blinked and looked around him. "What the? This isn't my lounge room." Took him a while to figure out what had happened. When he did, he looked up in front of him and at Irika. "We use cookies. By using our services, you acknowledge that you have read and accept our cookies, /cookies/ and privacy/policies. Except, darn, this is the third time this month," he grumbled. Turning on his heel, the Jonin looked back down at his book and walked out of the classroom, reading to himself in audible mumbles. "Now let's see." Kyoshi takes the man's hand gently into hers and says with powerful passion, "Make love to me, baby, like there's no tomorrow." The door slammed shut as Kakashi departed, leaving a rather shocked class in his wake. Hee hee! A voice exclaimed from above, causing everyone to look up to see Naruto sitting up in the railing above the classroom, grinning down at all of them. I was actually aiming for his book, but I ended up grabbing him by accident. Iruka blinked and then smiled, whereas the students were just staring at him in disbelief, mouths agape. Well, it was impressive enough, Naruto. Come on down, the Chunin exclaimed, and Naruto punctually joined the rest of his students on the ground. Ino blinked as she watched Naruto file back into the line. Wow, that was actually pretty impressive. Kiba, who was standing beside her, grumbled and crossed his arms, Akamaru whining a little at his master's displeasure. Speak for yourself, the scruffy-haired boy replied, looking away and gritting his teeth. Great, I can't believe that Naruto actually outdid me in both stages. Grr. How did he get so good? Once all the students had performed their replacement techniques, Iruka then moved into the third stage, asking all the students to step outside onto the training field. The dusty earth promised some action as the students lined up to stand just outside of a white line drawn to form a large rectangle with lengths of 100 by 50 meters. They watched as Iruka and Mizuki took up positions in front of the class side by side, with Iruka pulling out his clipboard and taking a couple of notes down, before looking back up at his students. Okay, now it's time for us to commence the third stage of the exam. Close combat, Iruka stated, gesturing towards Mizuki next to him. Each of you will take turns in fighting against Mizuki here. Now don't be put off because he's a Chunin. It's just to test how you'd fare if you are to encounter an enemy ninja who is stronger than you. In this part of the exam, you are to only use taijutsu or kenjutsu. The use of ninjutsu and doujutsu is prohibited, as well as the use of shuriken and kunai. Killing is also prohibited, and each match will end either in forfeit, time, or if the combatant is knocked out cold or is unable to battle. Mizuki nodded his head. All right, so who's going to be my first opponent? This was a question answered in order by name, as a student was called up alphabetically to fight against Mizuki. Everyone fared very well, save for those who lacked excessive taijutsu, but used the standard academy forms anyway. Sasuke did exceptionally well, so did Kiba as per expertise, and Choji and a few others. Some of them were a bit less confident, such as Hinata, and Sakura and Ino got in their fair fights. It was when it came around to Naruto the students were eager to see what the so-called Dead Last, now nicknamed the Lucky Last, could cook up with this time. Everyone watched in curiosity as Naruto took to the field and stood across from Mizuki, arms at his sides and a smile on his face. Mizuki took a stance and smiled at the boy. Come on Naruto, show me what you've got, the Chunin exclaimed. Do your best, okay? TSK whatever, the boy replied, also taking a stance, right arm raised and his side slightly facing the Chunin, with his left arm held behind him. All right then, said, holding up his hand and dropping it down. Begin. Mizuki smiled and charged at the boy, bumping up his strength, speed, and skill level to a level he knew Naruto wouldn't be able to beat. He intended to have the boy fail miserably. Unfortunately, this was not to be the case. Naruto, seeing the focus of Mizuki centered on him, smirked and straightened himself, dropping his right arm. When the Chunin came in with a jab, the boy, with surprising agility and lightness, spun on his axis and, catching the fist, kicked out with his right foot at his attacker's feet, knocking him off balance and tripping the man up as he stepped behind him with relative ease. Mizuki flipped forward and landed on his backside with a loud thud, causing some of the students to wince as the Chunin stared ahead of him in shock as Naruto stood behind him, smirking. Ino blinked. Hey, what just happened? What was with that move? Choji asked. I've never seen Naruto move like that, ever. We use cookies. By using our services, you acknowledge that you have read and accept our cookies, and privacy/policies. Except that grapple was flawless, Shino whispered, catching Kiba's attention, who was standing right beside him. His taijutsu performance so far has been relaxed and calm. His movements came out in flow, not hindrance at all. Yeah, but I could barely see that. First Mizuki-sensei charged him, and then suddenly Naruto just moved around him, and then Mizuki is on the ground. How can he move that fast? Shino asked. The bug user hummed to him, replaying the clip in his mind, studying the boy's movements. What the? Mizuki looked behind him, seeing Naruto looking down at him with a smirk. You know, you'd better watch where you're going, sensei, the blonde exclaimed with a grin. You were careless, and you tripped over your own feet. Iruka raised an eyebrow and smiled, finding Naruto's comments, though teasing, quite appropriate for the moment. Although that last move was pretty good. Nicely played, Naruto. Mizuki gritted his teeth and got back to his feet, dusting himself down before turning back to Naruto, his anger replaced with a kind smile, an obviously forced one. Nice move, Naruto, but let's see you do that again, the Chunin said, quickly taking a stance and lunching, throwing combinations of punches and kicks at the boy in quick succession, using combos that surprised a lot of the students at their speed and strength. Mizuki was obviously opening up with all he had. Naruto, however, took it into stride. With his arms behind his back, he dodged, ducked, and easily avoided all of Mizuki's attacks, moving with such grace and speed within such close proximity of his opponent that a lot of the academy students had to blink and rub their eyes to see if they weren't being deceived. The dead last of the group was actually faring well against the Chunin, who was fighting through bared teeth as he attempted to hit his mark. However, Naruto easily moved around his attacks, and once again managed to get behind Mizuki. The Chunin gasped and looked around behind him from left to right, trying to look for his opponent whom he had lost in his forward attacks. Naruto kept behind him, back to back and moving in perfect sync with the Chunin, keeping out of sight with a smirk on his face. So far, he hadn't even thrown a punch yet, and was conserving energy. It was when he jabbed his rear end out, knocking Mizuki forward, did that defensive mark change. The students were in utter disbelief as Naruto easily evaded all of the Chunin's attacks, which were becoming more ferocious with each swing. Even Sasuke was in shock as he watched the blonde enter Mizuki's range before quickly exiting, throwing the Chunin off his game. Everyone, from Sakura to Ino and to Shikamaru, was all the more surprised to hear Naruto laughing in enjoyment. He was literally dancing around his opponent. "Olé!" Naruto exclaimed, rushing forward and striking Mizuki with an elbow, winding the Chunin before striking him in the back, causing him to stumble forwards. Mizuki growled and spun back around, throwing another punch at Naruto, who suddenly phased out of sight, only to appear behind Mizuki, back to back again. The Chunin, fed up, spun around again and sent a knee up, only to have it blocked by another knee thrown by Naruto. They both separated, giving each other a certain distance before Mizuki charged again with a shout, with Naruto dropping into a stance this time. The Chunin didn't gain the needed distance in time when Naruto suddenly leapt at him through the air. Throwing his left arm back and over his head, the boy flicked his wrist a little, a blade emerging from his sleeve with a loud slice sound. Mizuki was running forwards when this occurred, and was unable to double back in time when his small opponent suddenly landed on him front on, driving both his feet into Mizuki's chest, using his forward momentum to knock the Chunin falling back and, grabbing the side of his head with his right hand, then drove his left hand straight down for the pressure point at his neck. When Mizuki fell flat on his back to the ground with Naruto on top of him, it was revealed that the boy held back on that last attack, and was smirking down at the white-haired Chunin with utter seriousness etched into his expression. Irika saw what had happened, and was rather befuddled that his best friend was beaten by an academy student. The rest of the students were also in utter shock, staring at Naruto as if he had just grown a second head. That may be the case, however, as they were looking at a totally different and rather likable Naruto Uzumaki. "Uzumaki assassination technique complete!" Naruto exclaimed, raising his hand away from Mizuki and retracting his blade. "I win!" Mizuki stared up at Naruto wide-eyed and dripping with sweat, absolutely shocked to realize that he was almost killed by the Kyuubi's host, the demon, the so-called dead last, an academy student. The first he felt was a grave numbness, before he was overcome by anger and annoyance. Naruto grinned at him one last time before backflipping off of the Chunin, landing perfectly and soundlessly. Adjusting his jacket, the boy then turned away and walked back into the crowd of students, where he was congratulated by a still shocked Choji and Shikamaru, as well as a silent nod shared between him and Kiba. Not bad for a dead last. Not bad for an underdog. They both grinned and turned back to Irika, who was just checking the marks and keeping score. Once everyone was done with the sparring, they were then led back inside by a very flustered Mizuki and a rather satisfied Irika. He never expected this part to have gone so smoothly, and was expecting the last and final stage to go on just as well. After all the students and senseis filed into the classroom, Irika sat down at his desk and pulled up another chair for Mizuki, who sat down in it, a frown still etched out on his expression. Irika ignored his blatant grumbling about being bested by a student, and just went on with sorting the marks. Double-checking everyone won, Irika proceeded with the final stage, writing up onto the board, "Third/final stage, Clone Jutsu." With a smile, he spun around, tossing the chalk away with disregard. All right, class. It's time for the last part of the exam, and perhaps one of the easiest tests of the lot. You will be asked to perform a basic clone jutsu technique, the one we've been practicing for the entirety of the final term. I expect all of you to create an exact, solid duplicate of yourself with the jutsu. So I'll ask each of you to come up front one by one and perform it in front of the class. One by one, he called each student up for the last time, asking each of them to perform a clone jutsu. Each of them performed basic ones, but those who possessed different abilities created clones based on them, such as Shino, who created a bug clone, and Ami, who created an earth clone. Regardless, every student performed well, including Naruto, who had yet another interesting show to display. When he was called up, he placed his hands together in a different hand sign compared to the other students. Irika was about to correct him, but Naruto's jutsu was already active. Multi-shadow clone jutsu, Naruto exclaimed. In a series of blinding puffs of smoke that filled up the entire classroom, the students and the jutsu user himself were joined by at least 100 more Narutos. They took up all the remaining space in the classroom, basically suffocating everyone with the amount of clones there were. All the Narutos shouted at each other and pushed each other aside for more room, befuddling an already perplexed class and a rather shocked Irika to see the number of clones the boy had managed to create. The real Naruto gave Irika the thumbs up, but was distracted from a grin when several of his clones bumped into him. Grumbling, Naruto shoved back, only to start a fight between them. Irika watched as the 5 Narutos out of the 100 brawled, and so did the other students, who crowded in their seats to try and get a better look. "Hey, get off of me. Quit pushing. Stop touching me. Get away from me, Naruto. Hey, what did I do? No, not you. Him. Me? Yes. No, not you, him. But I'm him. And you're me. Okay, I get it. Shove off already. We use cookies. By using our services, you acknowledge that you have read and accept our cookies, and privacy/policies. Accept, that's it, buddy." The fighting and loud arguments continued, which quickly added more to Mizuki's already pounding headache and Irika's thinned-out patience. It was only when the brown-haired Chunin got a little fed up with the fight that he broke it up. "All right, Naruto, excellent work with the jutsu, but you're going to have to work out your little tussle with your clones another time," the scar-faced ninja exclaimed, pushing a couple of the Narutos away and helping the real one up. He smiled at the bruised-up one and nodded to him. "But great job, though, you passed." "Ah, really?" Naruto exclaimed, quickly getting to his feet. "Awesome. Thanks, Irika-sensei. Not to worries." The real Naruto dispelled all his clones and, giving Irika a complete thumbs up, headed back to his seat to join the other students, most of them still astounded by the amount of Narutos there had been. By this time, a lot of those students who had belittled Naruto and called him a dead last were now either seriously rethinking their opinions on him or had set aside their claims of him being a loser. Irika smiled as he saw Naruto get congratulations from a couple of the other students sitting around him. Perhaps this was turning into a great day after all. Early the next morning, Naruto was briskly training in a clearing outside of the residential area, throwing various combinations of punches and kicks, and shifting through his taijutsu forms. He had this field many times before and would use them again if he had to continue to train and get stronger, but for now, he was just using this time to blow off a little steam. Young boy growled as he gave it his all and put effort into making all his stances and attack correct. Thrust, knee, jab, punch, hook, elbow, elbow, return, low kick, spin, low kick, upper kick. Don't lean in, you're off balance. Kick, kick, downward elbow, punch, punch, ho uppercut, uppercut, jab. Naruto thought vigorously, his breaths coming out in long, controlled breaths. He shifted through another style of taijutsu, his punches and kicks becoming more vigorous. "Come on," Naruto growled, sweat pouring from his face as he fought again, the weights with enhanced gravity seals straining down on his body. It restricted him, made high work, and that's how he liked it. "I will not give up," he shouted, punching vigorously, causing sweat to fly off of his arm. Wearing nothing but his pants and his headband meant that people could literally see the sweat running down his body, as well as several recently healed, deep scars in his body, showing just how far the boy had gotten in fights and training. Not to mention personal vendettas. "Flip!" he shouted, kicking off the ground band back, flipping through the air, opening up and sending roundhouse and spin kicks in midair, creating loud whooshing sound as feet cut through the air. He landed solidly, continuing his combos as his fighting became more diverse and erratic. He then leapt into the air once again, flipping several times while curled up into a ball, before opening up and coming down with a right downward kick. "Uzumaki spinning kick!" Naruto shouted, his heel connecting with the ground. Due to the extra chakra he had pumped into it, the kick had more of an effect than first thought. The moment attack connected, the ground slit and began to crack, before caving in on itself and collapsing across the clearing for about 15 meters in every direction. The dust rose settled, leaving Naruto still standing in that position of execution and contact. Panting from 3 hours of workout on just plain physical enduring taijutsu, the boy nodded his head and wiped his face off of sweat, before reassuming a proper standing position and calling it quits. Knowing he had academy to attend in an hour or so, Naruto walked over to the nearby tree he had deposited his clothes, and slipped them on, leaving his black, fur-collared jacket unzipped, exposing his chiseled stomach fresh from workout, and putting the large scroll he carried back around him. He then headed his merry way. While Naruto was walking through the quiet streets of his neighborhood, he suddenly sensed a familiar presence nearby, but continued walked. He knew this routine, and it getting quite tiresome having to fight for his life at this point. Closing his eyes, he shook his head with a smile when he heard the familiar hissing sound approaching his sharpened ears. As he continued walking on, his back was turned to the sight of 5 large snakes, all of them pythons, following him close behind, keeping to the shadows. Naruto, sensing the presence close in on him, flicked the wrist on his right, his hidden blade emerging with a loud slice. Too late. The instant his assassin's blade appeared, the snakes shot at him, and in a blink of an eye, wrapped around him about a dozen times, before beginning to constrict air out of him. The boy staggered, but could not move, his lungs emptying of all air as he felt the pressure of the snakes apply on him. Inch upon inch of thick, pure muscle squeezed down on him. His bones creaked, and his bloodstream clogged at the feeling of this incredible pressure. The boy glanced around, trying to find his opponent. Picking up something out of the corner of his senses, the boy visibly grinned before suddenly vanishing in a puff of white smoke. The woman that had attacked him gasped from her hiding place. "Rats! A shadow clone?" She suddenly picked up the sound of shuriken and spun around, before quickly backflipping out of the alleyway, where she once stood. Now for shuriken landed impaled soft soil. The woman growled as she backflipped away, avoiding more and more shuriken falling from the sky and landing in places where she once stood, before stopping dropped in a fighting stance and skidding to a halt from her built-up momentum. She glared up, just in time to see the single figure of the boy flying down at her from above. He cranked back his right arm, his blade once again appearing with a loud slick sound, to which she became alert too and grinned. Throwing her left arm forward, she shouted, "Ninja art! Hidden shadow snake hands!" She threw her left arm forward, and for snakes suddenly shot out of her arm, stretching to an amazing distance and striking Na at all 4 crucial points in his limbs, sending him flying and straight into the side of a nearby building, where he became pinned. Anko had managed to hit him just as he meters away from her, which was a really close call for the snake mistress. At least this meant they could continue. Anko grinned and, clenching her outstretched fist from its straightened fingers, the woman concentrated her chakra and yelled from where she crouched. "Ninja art! Shadow python restriction?" Suddenly, a python shot out of the ground right next to where Naruto was pinned, and immediately began to coil around him, smashing in and out of the wall and wrapping boy against it. The blonde growled in pain as he felt the snakes do their job of holding him down and glared at his grinning opponent, who licked her lips at the sight. My, I love it when my opponents play hard to get," she said in a rather suggestive voice. Naruto gritted his teeth briefly for a moment, a trickle of blood escaping the corner of his mouth, before a grin spread across his lips. He vanished once again in a puff of SM, causing Anko to blink in surprise. She smirked, looking down at the ground where she suddenly saw it crack. She detached her snake extensions from her arm and with the same one, raised her fist upwards and directed it down towards the earth. "Nice try, kid!" Unexpectedly, the ground behind her exploded in a shower of earth, debris and dust, and another Naruto emerged. The woman looked behind her in shock at the grinning, and suddenly the ground in front of her exploded as a foot shot up at her. It collided with the block she raised, but it sent her upwards into the air at the power behind it. S was then kicked in the back by the Naruto behind her, causing her to fall forwards and get hit a second time by a third Naruto that appeared in front of her, using the foot sticking out of the ground as extra leverage and sent a knee up into her face that sent her airborne. "Uzumaki rising wind technique," Naruto shouted, a 4th clone jumping out from behind the one behind the Naruto behind Anko, and pushing off of his counterparts back high into the air above Anko. The woman saw through squinted eyes and a blurred vision from a bruise suffered from the knee. The clone spin through the air above her, coming down at her with a downward kick. Uzumaki spinning axe kick, Anko smirked. Child's play. The blow connected with her forehead, and just as Anko's body began its dangerous descent, suddenly dematerialized to mud and clay, which Naruto found his leg now raw in. He growled in frustration as he and the mud hit the ground, the clones parting to make way for the supposed body of the target to hit the ground. Darn it! Naruto growled, trying to pull his leg free from the mud. The mud, then, in an unexpected twist, suddenly morphed into a nest of snakes. The mass of them then wrapped around Naruto's leg fully and began to overtake the boy they caught from head to toe. Naruto growled as he tried to free himself, but found it impossible. Ninja art! Hidden snake nest imprisonment, Anko exclaimed from the rooftop above, as she watched her snakes began to overcome the 4 clones. She watched with a as the shouting and struggling clones fought against the hundreds of snakes, but to no avail. You can thank Mizuki for that, Naruto stated, sitting on the ledge of the roof right next to Anko as they watched the rather daunting show below. The clones fought off the mass of snakes, one of them suddenly becoming overcome by snake bites, and soon dispersing from the amount of venom injected. The blonde smirked as he glanced but he's not going to be a problem anymore. So I've heard, Anko said through a grin, rounding on the boy with pride shining in her eyes. I'm proud of you, Gaki. You've finally taken matters into your own hands. Haven't I always? Naruto replied, looking out over the rooftops from their position on the building. The two of them relaxed back, putting their hands behind their heads, letting out sighs of content. I need to train more to reach your level, Anko-sensei. I haven't yet reached your level of expertise. Yet you were not only able to overcome a number of Root's best guards, but also kill Danzo in a head-to-head. Battle and a fully fledged Chunin stronger than even Irika, Anko pointed out. But on those occasions, I not only carefully analyzed my situation and point of attack, but also calculated the best possible means of execution. Naruto continued, watching the clouds overhead drifted by, the fight several stories below now over. Danzo was easy because not only did I know how to fight a Sharingan, as well as him having his right side of his body damaged, I also got a little lucky. I had the opportunity to use my Kunai gauntlet, which he had never faced before. The boy stated, holding up his lu and rattling it. Mizuki was easy though. A Chunin who puts too much focus into his point of attack and distracted by his opponent is more than likely to fall for deception, you said. What? I never said that. Anko looked at the boy. I said hard work, and hard work can make you into a man. You must have picked that up from Jiraiya. Naruto chuckled. Yeah. I guess Ero Sennin did mention something like that when he was teaching me about Genjutsu. And yet, once again, you weren't listening to him. Partially. He really knows how to draw on. I like it quick and simple, much like Irika-sensei. And what about me, Gaki? Anko asked, causing Naruto to look at her. She made a cute pout and batted her eyelashes at him. What about you're so lovable, Anko-chan? Shine of all of your sexual fantasies and adventures. Naruto blinked at her, taken aback with a rather horrified expression on his face. Please, don't ever do that again? What, this? Anko asked, once again performing a cute pout. Yes, that. All right, Anko exclaimed, looking back towards the sky. Don't get those white boxers with the orange and pink foxes on them into a knot. Yeesh. Naruto blushed at the reference towards his undergarments and cleared his throat, staring back up at the sky with sweat drops falling from his forehead. Sometimes but how much you're spying on me. Can you blame me? It's the way I work. I was waiting for the perfect time to strike, stalking my prey, watching its every move from the shadows, and waiting for its attend slip up. That's my style, Anko exclaimed, pinching him in the arm. Ow! The two of them spent the next half an hour and more talking, sharing a packet of dango Anko had gotten earlier onwards, and telling each other stories. They acted as if they were the best of friends, which they were, and Naruto, out of the majority of his dark and depressing life, found that he was enjoying himself. Anko too, who felt she share anything with the young, newly appointed genin of Konohagakure. Speaking their mind, sharing each other's experiences, as well as being one with the same person strands, meant that they could have fun together. Soon enough, they both had to go their separate ways, and while Naruto departed over his usual route across the rooftops, Anko slipped into the shadows and vanished in smoke, heading towards the Hokage's tower. Naruto arrived at the academy not too long afterwards, stopping by the Nagasaki's dumpling bar to pick up a box of dango and pork buns to eat while walking. He pocketed rest of it in its container as he entered the classroom, where he was met with the sight of the usual early birds, including one Shikamaru Nara, who only got up this early as could get to school and sleep in class and not worry about anything else. Naruto shook his head and took his seat, letting his face fall slightly as he rested in his usual place. Sigh. Another day. Another day alone at the academy. Nothing else needs to be said, he thought. Feeling picky, he decided to pull out the packet of dango again and, letting it simmer on the desk in front of him, began gorging on the sweet delights one ball and bun at a savoring the taste so to pass the time. He got so indulged in his breakfast that he failed to notice Choji sneak by and grab one of the buns on his way, to which Naruto GLA at him for. But the way the blonde's cheeks were puffed up for already having food in his mouth made it difficult to take him seriously. Choji, please and thank you? Oh, sorry Naruto, Choji exclaimed, putting it back and looking back at him. Naruto, may I please have one of your delicious pork buns? Naruto smiled and nodded. Sure thing Choji, he exclaimed, watching Choji pick up the bun and walk off, giving Naruto the thumbs up. Delicious, the Akimichi mumbled through a full mouth. Naruto returned the thumbs up and went back to his meal. Naruto quietly continued his meal, as one after another, students filed into the classroom. It was while he was busy saucing up one of the last of his dango sticks, did he see surprising presence sit down beside him. He looked to his right, and sitting beside him was none other than the famed Sasuke Uchiha. The raven-haired boy took a seat with any hesitation next to the blonde, and then sat quietly staring ahead of him with his fingers laced together. The blonde genin just stared at the boy from where he sat, dango stick in hand and dripping with delectable sauce. Neither of them moved or engaged one another in conversation, and Sasuke just sat there. Naruto scrunched his face up in confusion, before looking back at his food and taking a bite from his dango, chomping the dumpling, swallowing it, before glancing at the Uchiha. It was then, Sasuke glanced over at the blonde, and nodded to him. Hey, Naruto said, completely weirded out at this point. He edged away a bit. What's the deal? What? Why are you sitting here? Naruto asked, looking around at all the other empty seats. There are plenty of other spare seats available. Why sit here? Sasuke shrugged. Does it matter? Naruto frowned. Guess not, and returned to his dango and buns. Sasuke caught whiff of the sauces and the steam, and took a longer glance at the breakfast Naruto was having. After a few minutes of watching Naruto finish his dango, the Uchiha leaned over a bit and pointed out the last dango stick. Could I try that? Could I try that last dango, please? Sasuke asked more politely. Okay, now either Naruto was tripping, or he could swear Sasuke was asking him for something. Neither of them had ever spoken before, and he knew the Uchiha to be Hig arrogant, as well as being a high, mighty emo loner. But to have the famed Sasuke Uchiha of Iruka-sensei's class actually associating with him in this way, as well as sitting to him, was a huge step that Naruto wasn't at all prepared for. Shocked, the blonde grabbed the last stick and handed it to him, to which Sasuke sniffed it, before taking it out of one of the dumplings. Naruto watched through shock and awe as Sasuke swallowed, and smiled an actual, genuine smile. That's good, he exclaimed quietly, before continuing to eat. Okay, I am totally freaking out right now, Naruto said, backing away in his seat a little. Why? Sasuke asked while chewing on the dango dumpling. Sasuke, is something wrong with you? Naruto asked, raising an eyebrow. After 5 years of being in the same class together and we've never spoken, and all of a sudden you've managed to hold a few brief words with me for the last 5 minutes. So, you're starting to scare me, Naruto replied. Are you coming on to me? Sasuke choked on his dango, coughing and slamming his fist into his chest when a piece of dango clogged his breathing canal. He managed to dislodge it and looked at Na with wide eyes. What? Because I'll know if you are. The Uchiha gritted his teeth and turned back to his dango, completing shrugging the statement off after the initial shock. Dobe. Heh, that's better, Naruto replied, moving on to finish the last bun. I still think you're gay though, and I still think you're an idiot. The two of them turned to each other and smirked, but then turned back to finish their food. It wasn't too long though till the pair of them was joined by a couple more faces. Just as Naruto was getting used to the quietness of his surroundings, he suddenly spotted pink-haired girl and a blonde-haired girl standing right beside him, and looked up. He had to restrain himself from blushing when he saw one Sakura Haruno glaring down and her friend Ino Yamanaka accompanying her. Sakura Haruno, the complete adoration and love of his life. She was simply a vision of beauty, bearing a smile beyond compare and eyes that shone like emeralds. The girl magnificent specimen. Any man would say that, and he adored and prolonged the very sight of her for as long as possible. However, thanks to his past memories of pain, suffering, insecurity, and rejection, he always hid his blushes and emotions of any indication of affection towards her under a second mask. He could not bear the thought of being rejected by her again. Then there was her friend Ino. She was just as much of a flower as Sakura was, and like Shikamaru and Choji, he had known the pair for a long time, ever since he met Teich when he was younger. But some strange twist in time broke them apart, and Naruto rarely spoke to them again. He just continued to admire them from the shadows, hid and safe, and where he felt the most serenity in the world. But whenever they brought the light over to him, he felt different. He felt happier. He smiled up at the pair, trying to suppress the blush of admiration. "Hey there, Sakura-chan, Ino-chan, what's up?" he asked. Ino, gathering up common courtesy and not wanting to make a scene, smiled and waved at the young male. "Hey there, Naruto," she replied. "Not much." Sakura smiled at Naruto too and waved. "Everything's great too. It's just..." "Oh, right," the boy said, looking back down at his empty food carton inside. "Sasuke." He stood up and smiled towards the two girls again. "You can have this seat. My food somewhere else." Okay," Sakura replied, blinking. "Shove over, forehead." "He was offering it to me," Ino stated, doing a complete 180 in her attitude, and pushed Sakura aside. However, the pink-haired Kunoichi wasn't going to give up without a fight, and shoved back, both of them blocking Naruto's only way of exit, and leaving him to watch the fight unfold in front of him. "No, I'm sitting here, Ino pig. Naruto was offering it to me. Well, I'm not going to let you steal Sasuke-kun away from me. Move." "No, you get lost. I'm going to sit next to Sasuke-kun." "Like hell you are. Take a hike, pig. You could use the exercise." "Forehead, pig, billboard brow, swine." Naruto looked back down at Sasuke to see his reaction. The Uchiha just shrugged at him and went on to staring ahead of him. The blonde sighed and placed his sauce-filled dumpling container back onto his desk and looked back at the girls, holding up both of his hands, and grinned sheepishly at the two fighting girls, who were now wrestling each other for the seat. Sakura-chan, Ino-chan, do you mind if I could move while you two decide who gets to sit here?" "No, I'm sitting there. Shove off." "Why don't you?" "No, you, just disappear already." "Oh, for heaven's sake," Naruto mumbled, shaking his head and slapping his forehead protector. "This is just like Anko and her mood swings. Ero-senin with his pervert, and Bachan with her drunkenness." At this point, the whole class was now watching the catfight open up before them. Here the two girls were now pulling on each other's hair and grappling through tooth, and at this point, they have resulted to overpowering the other with all of their strength. And seriously, it was with all their strength. "Get a life, forehead. Go find another guy. Sasuke-kun is mine." "Well, I don't see your name on him. Get lost. Make me." It was then Ino suddenly pushed Sakura forward, causing her to trip and to fall awkwardly on top of Naruto, both of them letting out yells of shock as they fell on top of SA, who was conveniently leaning forward in his usual way, causing him to yell out in shock when he was suddenly pushed forward thanks to an extra weight on his back. The W class, especially Ino, gasped at the sight they saw. Whether it was good or bad depends on the deliverer and the receiver. Of course, it was rather a peculiar situation. Sakura had conveniently been pushed on top of Naruto, causing both of their lips to collide in a rather weight-distributed kiss. At the same time, Naruto had fallen on top of Sasuke, and in his haste had pushed the container of D-sauce onto Sasuke's part of the desk. So when the Uchiha was forced down by the extra weight, his face went splat into the sauce. Now the Uchiha was struggling for air. He couldn't remove his face since Naruto and Sakura were on top of him, kissing in their awkward position. Ino giggled slightly at the looks of shock on Naruto and Sakura's faces, and how a deep blush seemed to grow on Sakura's cheeks. In the background, the students of the were slack-jawed. At the same time, a certain purple-haired Hyuga was fuming. As she kissed my Naruto-kun, in spite of her usual shyness, insecurity, and lack of confidence, Hinata's personality was suddenly pushed aside by an inner persona she knew she had, and her face was scrunched up with a look of outrage and jealousy no one had ever seen before. Shino, whom she was sitting next to, eased away with W eyes as he watched the steam rising from the Hyuga's head. That bitch! Meanwhile, Sasuke was still face down in the sauce, and was only able to edge his nostrils up a bit to get some much-needed oxygen. Please, get out of me, Sasuke mumbled. What in God's name are they doing? Making out? Sakura, of course, was in a well deep of shock, and her mind was trying to process what had just happened. The first thing she knew, she was falling, and the next thing SH knew, she found herself with her lips pressed up against Naruto's, who had an equally wide-eyed look staring back at her. But as the seconds ticked by, and she tried to eventually found herself to be enjoying this, and her eyes became half-lidded and a blush streaked across her lips. Hey, this isn't half bad, she thought, moaning a little and closing her eyes. Naruto, his lips, they are so warm. Naruto was also having 1,001 thoughts flooding through his mind. The girl who had for all these years saw him as an annoyance, and whom he had a crush just didn't admit it, was kissing him. This was a completely new experience for him, and he had no idea what to think. Sakura-chan is kissing me, Naruto thought loudly. I don't believe this. Wow. After a minute or so, with Ino getting as little worried at the lack of oxygen the three of them were getting, Sakura parted and looked down at Naruto with a flushed face. W returned it with his usual wide-eyed expression. The pink-haired girl licked her lips and smiled down at him. Pork. What? Naruto asked, still a little dazed. Your lips taste like pork. Really? Ino asked, smirking cockily at the supposed embarrassment she had caused her friend. So it wasn't that good? No, it was. Sakura's look hazed a bit and she smiled. Amazing. Sakura-chan, Naruto slowly said, his mind beginning to re-register again. Really? Ino asked, looking over. Here, let me taste, she exclaimed, pulling Sakura off of the boy hastily and without hesitation, kissing the boy. Naruto nearly fainted from this second kiss by the other girl, his expression becoming dazed in an anime way, his eyes becoming wide, white, and empty. Ino melted into it immediately, further shocking a already speechless class, nearly knocking Hinata out at the sight and bewildering a dazed Sakura, who looked outraged at the interruption. Ino pig. Ino moaned as she deepened the kiss, trying to put her tongue into the fray. Meanwhile, looking in on the scene from outside the building, holding a set of binoculars and eating a dango stick was none other than the purple-haired Jonin that had done nothing but encouraged the boy all his life. Anko was now sitting and watching with a huge grin on her face as the boy slowly became a man. Way to go, Gaki. Yeah, go brat. Another voice joined her, and she glanced to her left to see a white-haired Sannin joining her on the rooftop, looking through a telescope and at the same jotting down in his notebook what he called research. The old man giggled perversely and enhanced the view on his telescope. Oh, this is gold. Just the kind of material I need for my next book. And here I just came to see WH Team Naruto was going to be on. Let me guess. Anko began with a smirk. Is this the famed Erosenin and pervy sage I have been hearing so much about? What? Jiraiya exclaimed, glaring at the woman. I am not a pervert, Anko sniggered. Well, if the boot fits. I am not a pervert. I am. He continued, a creepy expression falling upon the old man's face, and at the same time, he held his hands up and wiggled his fingers in the insanely spine-tingling way possible. A super pervert. The purple-haired Jonin rolled her eyes and went back to watching the make-out session occurring between her little Naruto and the blonde known as Ino. Anyway, when new book coming out? Oh, which one? Ika Sauna or Ika Hot Springs? I forget, Jiraiya replied, putting his eye back to his telescope. The second one. Jiraiya began. That comes out in a month. Sweet, Anko grinned. Anyway, back at the school, Ino had managed to insert her tongue into the make-out session, much to Naruto's continually growing shock. But before she could take it any further, she was denied any mouth access when she was thrown off of Naruto by Sakura, who forced her against the side of the desk right next to Shikamaru, shaking it violently. The Nara looked up in surprise, checking to see what was going on, but then shrugged and went back to sleeping when he found out it was nothing. Too troublesome. What do you think you're doing? Sakura shouted at Ino. So good, the girl moaned in response, being the only reception Sakura was able to get from her dazed-looking friend. After a kiss like that, who wouldn't be? All right, listen here, you hussy. Naruto-kun is mine. Ino shook herself out of her daze and glared at her pink-haired rival. Oh yeah, well, you can have Sasuke. I can take Naruto if that's all right with you. What? No way, not after that. Naruto-kun is mine. No mine. No mine. You stay away from him. He's mine. I don't think so. Sasuke lifted his head from the sauce pit and looked up. Eyes narrowed and expression set in a way that increased its comical appearance by how the sauce W he pushed Naruto off of him slowly, looking down to see the dazed look on his face as the blonde unconsciously fell flat onto the desk in front of him. The uchi sauce, stopping just for a few seconds to taste it. Not bad, he mumbled in spite of his ego and pride being shattered. Naruto, on the other hand, was dizzy from the overload of processed information. That was so nice. He mumbled in his phase, cheeks blushing red and drool eyebrow at him before pushing him away. Stop flooding the place, dobe, Sasuke said, pointing out the drool leaking out of his mouth. It was a pretty hilarious sight, especially since Sakura and Ino we needed entrance by Irika that stopped the fight and brought everything back down to earth. All right, students, take your seats. As the newly made genin took to the rows, Irika noticed the state Naruto and Sasuke were in. Firstly, the Uchiha was Syovi been roughhoused by a hot dog. Then there was Naruto, who was lying in a semi-conscious state with a look of bliss and a blush on his face, and a drool-hanged desk. There were no signs of life coming from him. Hey, what happened to Naruto? Well, let me evaluate, Kiba exclaimed from behind, a smirk on his face, as he used hand signs in an attempt to put visual effects into use. Pinky fell on blonde container of dango sauce. Pinky kissed Blondie, Blondie kissed back, and second Blondie kissed Blondie upon removing Pinky. Simple as that. Irika blinked and stared at the underdog of the class, who shrugged at him for further inclination. A few seconds of silence was to follow before Irika's brain see, okay, moving on? Irika cleared his throat and looked down at his notepad, readying to make his announcements for the day. Now that you're all gradua final stages of your inauguration, so to speak, it is time to assign you to your teams. The class remained silent and listened in on this new information, while Naruto dazedly, but surely, regained consciousness to the real world. All shinobi and kunoichi of Kanehagakure, as well as all the neighboring countries with ninja support, have been assigned to teams. Teams consist of these three-man cells. All of you will learn to function as a team to complete your missions and learn the values of teamwork, Irika explained, by working as what one ninja can perform. So, how does this thing work? A random student called. Do we have to do everything as a team? Well, that is a yes and no, Irika continued. Yes, team assignments and duties require you to associate with your teammates and perform all the tasks given gatherings. But that doesn't mean you can't train and get stronger on your own time. You can continue to get stronger at your own pace, but you must maintain your teammates in order to create a strong force and be able to accomplish future mission faster. Most of the missions distributed to ninjas in Konoha require ninja are seen coming and going from the village. The students nodded in understanding, a hush murmur escaping over the ascending rows. Furthermore, each team is assigned their members based on their scores achieved in their exams and their full year's marks, Irika stated. Once these teams are made official, there is no going back and there is no arguing it. You will have to cope with your teammates and learn to get along with them. So, let's be Team 1. During the time Irika read out the teams, Naruto managed to regain consciousness. Like recovering from a hangover, the boy groaned and shook his head. Lu One's responsible for his sudden drop out of reality. He looked towards the upper rows, where he saw Sakura and Ino waiting eagerly for their teams to be read and waved, to which Naruto waved back with a grin. Boy, I will never get tired of that smile. Shaking his head, he stared back to the front of the classroom and waited for his team to be called out. Eventually that time came. Let's see, Team 7 will include Uzumaki Naruto, Irika began, Naruto's head popping up at the sound of his name. Haruno Sakura. Sakura pumped her fist. Huosha. And she stuck her tongue out at Ino, who fumed at being outmarked. The blonde girl folded her arms and sulked where S-way. Regardless, Naruto will be mine. Forehead. You can count on it. And Hyuga Hinata. Irika concluded. Hinata's eyes widened a bit, and Sakura deflated in a second upon hearing this. Ino was also a little surprised, as were a lot of the other students. Naruto blink-haired girl sitting next to Shino. The bug user glanced at her, his sunglasses flashing as he watched her face grow a bit in redness and her eyes shimmer in "Sir, what?" Sakura shouted. "Well, Irika cleared his throat and smiled, glancing down at his notepad. "And Team 7's Jonin leader will be." There was a smashing of windows, and suddenly a ball of bundled-up sheets flew in. When it unraveled, much to Naruto's dismay, who slammed his head reap upon realizing who it was, there stood Konoha's hottest kunoichi, Anko Mitarashi. Finishing up her last dango, she tossed the stick away and in an all-cool style, "Ha! Right on time too!" Anko exclaimed, pointing at the 3 students she was assigned and grinned. You and you. Meet me at Ichiraka's ramen bar in back to 1st grade." All the students in the class were staring at the woman with slack-jawed expressions, especially Sakura and a rather nervous-looking Hinata. Irika just rubbed manner, knowing that this was going to become a real pain for him in the future. Naruto groaned and looked up at the woman with a deflated and defeated look on his face, seeing Anko grinning at him happily. "You? Why you?" Of all the John, realization soon dawned on him, and he immediately rose to his feet. Immediately becoming enraged, he leapt at the woman, only to be quickly restrained by the moment they realized what was going to happen. They struggled to keep him in his seat. "Oh, you knew and you didn't tell me." The sight was rather comical. Anko laughed out loud, finding the scene in front of her the most hilarious she's seen all day. "I see you're happy to have me as your Jonin guide, Gaki, the Wahair. That's great. The angrier the better." She cocked an eyebrow as she watched Naruto struggle against the 4 of them. "That's what I really like about Yo." Sakura's eye twitched as she looked the woman up and down, analyzing her figure and the way she made her appearance known. "Who the heck is she?" I have ran down her spin at the grin she gave Naruto, staring him down without a hint of fear at all. "Boy, she gives me the creeps." Hinata gulped, having met this woman before on many occasions when Kurenai invited her out or over to her place. Sure, she was comfortable around her, but made her nervous. "Anko, our teacher." "Oh my," said purple-haired woman, looked at her 3 teammates, ignoring the gawks from the other students, and jabbed her thumb over her shoulder. "Come on, get moving. You have 5 minutes left." She folded her arms and looked at her nails casually, while at the same time mumbling a countdown. 4, 50 SI. Okay, we're going," Naruto shouted, jerking himself out of the boys' grips and sprinted out of the classroom, waiting at the door to be joined by her, and clapped her hands, coaching them on. "Come on, ladies. Move it. That goes for you too, Naruto-chan." "Fuck you," came Naruto's voice echoing down the hallway. "That's the spirit." Anko then began to follow, but before she left she turned to Irika and winked at him. "See you soon, Irika-kun." She left, leaving a blush in the students. The thought of Irika and Anko together made them feel a little ill. Several minutes later, the 3 members of Team 7 were sitting at Ichiraka's ramen bar, each of them with a cup of green tea in their hands and drinking half seconds before time expired, and treated them all to this social tea outing before getting down to the actual business. She took a long, dry sip from her cup, sitting next to her. "Well then, I guess introductions are in order," Anko exclaimed, causing Naruto, Sakura, and Hinata to look at her. The woman adjusted her coat and crossed H. "My name is Anko Mitarashi. I like dango, sweet bean soup, snakes, and playing with my prey. I dislike hot and spicy food, and people who judge you before th ceremonies. And my dream is, well, let's skip that." Naruto, Sakura, and Hinata blinked at the same time. "Huh?" Anko grinned at them and pointed in their direction. "Okay then, your turn. Tell me your name, your likes, dislikes, your hobby, and dreams for the future." Sakura developed a tick mark at that reference but went on anyway. "All right, my name is Sakura Haruno. I like dumplings, umebashi, and cherry blossoms," and slightly, causing Naruto to grin and rub the back of his head nervously. "I dislike Ino, and I wish to fight her to prove that I am stronger than her. My hobbies I dreams for the future include becoming a kunoichi and raising a family." Interesting, Anko exclaimed, rubbing her chin. "But boring." Sakura was shot down at this, and she immediately became pissed. Just kidding," Anko sniggered. "Okay, your turn, hotshot." Naruto grinned, My name is Naruto Uzumaki. I like training, practicing my ninjutsu, ramen, and everyone I care about. I also dislike people who judge me and include training, writing, I guess, and my dream is to become the strongest ninja in Konoha, so that I can protect all those closest to me and this village, he statement. Good on ya, Gaki, Anko exclaimed, giving him the thumbs up. Okay, now you bright eyes. Okay. Hinata began, taking in a deep breath of air to compose herself. I'm Hinata Hyuga. I like Zensai cinnamon rolls and Enen Naruto-kun. Flowers as a hobby, and my dreams for the future are to fight Niji and my father, to prove that I am stronger than they think. Naruto turned and smiled at the young girl, seeing the sincerity and courage behind her words. The purple-haired girl looked at the blonde and, upon seeing Hi heavily, before looking away, running a hand through her hair. Sakura also smiled at Hinata, then turned to Naruto and nudged him in the arm. You're pretty popular now, Naruto-kun. Yeah, I guess so, Naruto replied, but retracted into himself as his thoughts exposed a rather inconvenient truth he did not want to become aware to. You have done? Well then, now that we all know each other, Anko exclaimed, rising to her feet. I'd like to get one last thing over with. All of you come with me, she said with Sakura and Hinata at his sides, followed after, wanting to know what the Psycho Jonin had planned for them. Anko stood in front of her students in the middle of one of the many training grounds, checking her nails as the three of them looked around them. It was just with 3 posts standing proud in the center of the field. Naruto and Sakura looked at each other and shrugged, and Sakura shared with Hinata, looked back at the purple-haired snake Jonin. As she flicked a piece of dirt she found on her trench coat covering a full, upper body mesh. So, Anko-sensei, Hinata began, fingers laced together and hands held up to her chest. Why are we here? Yeah, what's the deal? Sakura blurted out. Are we, supposed to meditate or something? Get in touch with our inner self? Anko snorted. Yeah, I'd get you 3 to do something as boring as that. She shot back, smirking at them after lowering her hand to her side. Guess is hastily. Well, hurry up then. We don't have all day, Naruto shouted, waving his arms around and jumping on the spot. The snake mistress grin widened. All right then, here it goes. But I warn you, the following information may be of a shock to you, Anko said, taking in a deep tension to the moment. To the 3, the suspense was killing them, as noted by their nervous expressions, especially on Hinata's face. All right, as you make Ninja Academy training, signifying your graduation from the academy and your ascent to shinobihood. This is in part true. However, the reason you were given at the academy was to determine candidates worthy of possibly becoming actual genin. Sakura blinked at this. What are you saying? That the end of semester genin exams were pointless? No, that's not what I'm saying at all, Anko replied, letting out a sigh. The exam was just an actual test. The real exams are actually given by the Jonins, more practical, and test all aspects of what you have learnt over the course of your time at the academy. So then, these exams the Jonin are given, Naruto began, folding his arms. They are just to weed out the weak ones, and see which ones are to become G. Anko grinned and pointed at Naruto. You got it. So then wait, Sakura continued on step. If we're taking this exam now, then that means only a set number of students are going to make it as genin. Glad you asked, Anko exclaimed, slipping her kunai from her side holster and spinning it on her finger, snatching it into a single-handed grasp. She ran her to graduate, only 9 students will be able to make the cut. To put it more simply, it's a make or break test with a 60% success kill-off ratio, or more spec the 9. Hinata nodded. So that means you're going to give the final decision whether or not we make it or not? Naruto grinned. And it's safe to say that the Jonin decide our final fate. Sounds fun, doesn't it? Anko exclaimed, delightful venom dripping off of the tip of her tongue. It's the Jonin that administer the final tests. And if you haven planned for you. Quickly, she reached into her trench coat, acting as though she were drawing a weapon. The 3 youngsters leapt back in response. Drawn, Anko smirked. Good. They're able to catch on pretty quick. Let's put that to the test. She snickered and drew 3 slips of paper from her trench coat. Quickly, she then tossed the 3 pieces of paper towards them. To be caught by all of them saw that they were merely pieces of paper outlined in red with plain, unidentifiable seals on them. The three of them looked up at the snake Jonin in confusion. "What are these for?" Sakura asked. "They don't seem like any ordinary seals or tags," Hinata pointed out. "Correct," Anko exclaimed, nodding towards them. "Those are custom-made paralyzing tags. I was in a rush, so I had to improvise. Anyway, here is how this is supposed to be scheduled to be tested tomorrow morning. I have decided to give you 3 my tests now so I can administer my answer later without worry, and teams getting in our way. Your task is to try and tag me with at least 2 of these. The first 2 to tag me win, while the other third team member that doesn't pointing towards the 3 posts in the middle of the field. That person will have to stay there all day until tomorrow as a consequence. Any questions?" Naruto, Hinata, and Sakura stared at her dumbfounded. The impact of what she had just told them was unbelievable, making it a rather comical sight to the purple-haired Jonin. It was until their brains registered did what? Sakura yelled. This is insane, Hinata blurted out, but her voice didn't carry out with as much ferocity as intended. That means at least one of us will end up tied up and humiliated, Naruto roared out. It's basically just a race to see who can tag you first, and the loser is P. It's no joke, Anko exclaimed, grinning while twirling her kunai again. It's to make things more fun and interesting. This way, at least one of you will end up T as that. She looked down at her watch and nodded. You have 5 hours. After that, we will take a break. Then we can continue till 7. That sounds fair? She looked over at them, seeing their freaked out and dismayed expressions. She grinned and clapped her hands together. Excellent. You may begin. Snapping out of it, the 3 students crouched low and leapt away, vanishing into the surrounding forests. 2 hours later, Anko was sitting on top of one of the posts comfortably. A box of dango opened up in front of her and an iPod in hand. With both earpieces in her ears, she leaned out, smiling happily, as if oblivious to everything else around her. She bobbed her head slightly when a good chorus came on, the earphones blazing. Oh yeah, that's the stuff. In the trees of the surrounding forests, 3 sets of eyes were watching her closely from afar, perched on a tree to Anko's right, but too in deep for her to see their sensei closely, observing her, summarizing her up with their eyes. They knew they had to remain hidden and come up with a plan to overcome her. Saku aimlessly listened to her music, bopping her head to the music and enjoying a nice snack of dango. The nerve of her, Sakura growled. How can she listen to music and at the same time ask us to tag her when she's clearly not interested in this test at all? Not just yet, Naruto said, grabbing her shoulder to keep the girl from going in. Sakura growled and turned to him. Come on, are you stupid or something? If she's not paying attention, then we've got a chance of taking her. She tried to his eyes as he glared out towards their sensei stopped her. For the first time ever, Sakura saw a look of a dead man glaring ahead of him. His once kind, bright under them, showing fatigue and exhaustion from years of suffering. She immediately placed them from just one look, and she was shocked none to say the Lu and Naruto. Sakura whispered, blinking as she stared slightly wide-eyed and almost fearfully at him. Hinata looked too and also saw the look. She had a simi seeing the change in Naruto's eyes. In fact, to them, he didn't look like Naruto at all. He looked like a completely different, broken man. He looked at them, seeing them staring at him in shock and fear. Knowing what they were looking at, his look softened a bit and he reached into his backpack, slipping it over his face easily and raising his hood. I know, Naruto said, his voice slightly muffled by the mask. He then glanced round at them and nodded towards them, seeing a change in expressions. I've Byakugan and see if there is anything out of the ordinary going on. If I know Anko, she is not going to make this easy for us, even though we're just genin. Hinata, returning to the real world with Sakura, nodded her head and looked ahead of her, slapping her hands together into a hand sign. Sakura looked at her. Byakugan? You mean the Hyuga family's infamous doujutsu? Yes, Hinata replied, opening her eyes, with veins suddenly appearing on the outer side of both eyes. Byakugan! Her vision expanded, and she immediately threw her enhanced field of view, trying to look for any traps or anything out of the ordinary. It was then, through her field of view, she spotted something of the woman's headsets, something she knew was off. She followed it, careful not to strain her head too far, and spotted something in the bushes, something long. There's something, Hinata said, catching the pair's attention. Chakra streams. Faint, but it's there. And there's a animal, like a reptile or something. Naruto glanced behind him, not moving his head much towards the trees below. He smirked when he spotted the problem and jabbed Sakura's attent movement. She followed it and also saw the problem a story below them. She gritted her teeth and looked back at their opponent. Great. She found us and she knows we're here, Sakura said. Told you she was tricky, Naruto stated. She would have known you were going to attack her before, and she would have easily finished you. That's why we moving in. Sakura nodded, drawing a shuriken and, without turning her head, tossed it straight down at the snake hiding in the bushes below. There was a hiss as the SN smoke. Anko's ear twitched, causing her to glance around and smirk. About time something happened. Naruto glanced at Sakura, the girls turning to him for further instructions, while Hinata kept a close watch on Anko out of the corner of her still active Byakuga. So what do we do? Naruto rubbed his chin in thought. It's a risky wager, but can you use genjutsu, Sakura? Sakura shrugged. It's not an affinity of mine, but I've experimented with some. What kind do you want me to use? The boy glanced at her and stared at her through his mask. All right, here's what I need you to do. A few minutes later, Anko waited and continued listening to her music, tapping her fingers and clicking at the rhythm. It was at this time of anxious waiting, teach up on the sounds of shuriken and kunai heading her way. A cluster of them shot from the trees to her left and she grinned, catching the first four between her other four headed her way, knocking them out of the air easily. Too slow, she exclaimed, only to get a mighty shock when the ground behind her exploded, and out jumped a masked Naruto with his hood pulled over, the sea and blade emerging with a slice. Anko smirked and threw her left arm behind her, tossing a cluster of shuriken at him. They struck head on just as he was THRE white smoke. Like I said, huh? Anko looked ahead of her now, craning her neck back to do so to see another cluster of 4 kunai flying straight at her. She backflipped the first 2 that thunked loudly against the log side where her legs used to be hanging, and crouched low atop of the stump, low enough to avoid the last TW. Anko smirked. Not bad, Pinky, the woman exclaimed, spotting the ruffling in the trees ahead of her. She held up her right arm, the sleeves shuffling in her ninja art. Shadow snake hands, she shouted, throwing her right arm forward, the 4 familiar snake lengths shooting out and flying directly for the place they struck the bushes head-on. A light cry emerging forth and making Anko grin. She tugged on them, drawing back her snakes, and when they emerged, the student. Upon withdrawing them fully, Sakura flew right into her hand, and Anko grabbed her by the ring of her shirt collar, holding her up to see the girl's starry, gotcha, Pinky. Anko grinned at her. Sakura stared at her through fearful eyes for the next few seconds, but then, a grin suddenly appeared on her face, and the girl exploded into a cloud of cherry watching as the petals blew around her. A cherry blossom clone? She asked. No, it can't be. It doesn't feel like it. Suddenly, the cherry blossom petals overcame her, becoming a really thick cloud, and the woman suddenly found her hands grabbed and held down by a pair of blossom petals swarming around her mouth, and tried to get a better look to see who was doing it. It was then the purple-haired girl was able to grasp the full in surprise. Genjutsu? Heh. She is quite the talent in producing illusions. Realizing she didn't have much time left, Anko bit on the corner of her mouth, drawing blood, the pain quickly forcing her out of her stupor. Her eyes widening, being held down by both Naruto and Sakura, and Hinata was coming at her from in front, tag in hand and ready to slap on. Gritting her teeth, Anko's arms jerked slightly and she managed to aim her hands upwards, catching the attention of the 2 students holding her arms down. Ninja art! Hidden Mamba technique! Anko exclaimed. Suddenly, 2 gray snakes shot out of her sleeves, forcing Naruto and Sakura to release her and surprise victims, and their heads protruded upwards, mouths becoming agape, showing the black gum underneath of the most dangerous and venomous. Small snake eye plunged down at their victims, biting into their necks. Anko intended to knock them out with poison, and administer the antidote as soon as she dealt with Hinata, but got quite a shock when the 2 students DeSap replaced by logs. The woman blinked and glared ahead of her, seeing Hinata lunge at her with a tag. Holding her mouth open, a snake quickly shot out of her mouth, intending to strike the girl. Hinata, though surprised, quickly acted and leapt into the air. Flippy Anko's hidden cobra tongue missed her target and struck the ground instead, but retracted quickly when she realized she had missed. Spinning around and rising to her feet, Anko smiled and placed her hands on her hips, watching as Hinata lunged at her again. Tag pocketed and Byakugan Blah identifiable gentle fist style of fighting, unleashing devastating combinations at Anko, who easily dodged and backed away from the girl's assault, smiling. Not bad, Hinata, Anko exclaimed, slipping around the girl when she struck at her with a straight jab, only to stumble forwards when she missed her mark. And she managed to pivot out of her stumble, quickly setting her sights back on her mark. But you'll need the help of your teammates to help subdue me. Suddenly, a pair of hands shot out of the ground and grabbed Anko by her ankles, surprising the woman and causing her to look down. Where she saw the face were it not for the mask, you could see the grin plastered on her face. Who says she doesn't? Anko growled and was about to throw a punch down at him, but couldn't when she heard the sounds of rushing footsteps coming at her from behind. She glanced with a tag in hand. Grinning, the girl leapt at the woman at full speed. Anko tried to turn around and move to counter, but couldn't since Naruto was holding on anything in time when Sakura landed on her and slapped her tag onto her back, immediately jumping off as soon as it was on. The woman tried to reach back to remove it, but was soon overcome with a hot, electric effect. Small streams of purple electricity coursed over her body from pain, nearly collapsing to her knees. This was a sign that she had been hit. Looking up, she saw Hinata coming at her again with another strike, her palm glowing with chakra. Not wanting to be hit by that, Anko reached up with her Thursday from her lip, where she had bitten to awaken her out of the Jinjutsu. Once patting her hand with the blood, she placed it on top of Naruto's face, still protruding, summoning jutsu, she yelled. Hinata was halted from her attack by a blast of white smoke, with Naruto's yell of shock accompanying her little cry when the entire area was filled with blindin, just far enough to be within shuriken range, and also far enough to watch what was unfolding. The three students watched from their positions, and Hinata and they saw a giant snake appeared where Anko once stood. The massive serpent leered down at the two girls it could see, while it was on top of Naruto. Its tongue flickered out, tasting the air, and once getting a good W backed away in fear, and Hinata, trembling from head to toe, also backed off. Anko sat atop of her summon's head, smirking as she looked down at her opponents. "That was good, you three," she exclaimed, running her tongue over her upper lip. "But let's up the test a little." "Hey, no fair," Sakura shouted, but immediately had to jump away when the snake's tail swiped at the pink-haired girl. She commando rolled along the ground upon stopping. "Everything's fair in the midst of battle, Pinky," Anko stated. "There is no mercy, sympathy, or chivalry in our line of work. You must understand that." Not too far from the snake's position, the ground cracked, and following the fist that punched out of it crawled a dirt-covered Naruto. The yellow-haired Gaki GR and glared behind him at the towering snake leering over his two girl teammates. He knew he had emerged behind Anko and had the jump on her. Anko smirked as she looked down at Hinata, who she knew had a tag on her. "You're mine now, bright eyes," she exclaimed in a simulated evil voice, although directing her hand. Her snake lunged in at her with its jaws wide open. However, just before the snake could attack Hinata, the girl suddenly vanished in a yell, literally. Anko blinked and spun around, seeing Hinata appear beside Sakura, accompanied by their teammate Naruto. "Here, Hinata, take this," Naruto whispered, giving Hinata his seal behind his back as Hinata assumed a stance. She took it and blinked in surprise. "And Naruto-kun, I trust you know what to do with it. Now, let's go," Naruto shouted, drawing a kunai and taking a stance. "Right," Sakura and Hinata said, also taking their appropriate fighting stances. Anko's snake turned on them, along with Anko, who was still crouched. Atop of her giant snake's head. She grinned as she watched the three genin take their S-jonin. Had to admit, they made quite a strong team. "Not a chance, brats," Anko shouted, drawing her own kunai and grinning. "Do you think you three alone are enough to take on a fully fledged jonin?" "Hell yeah!" A double, familiar shout sounded from behind and above the purple-haired woman, a gasp emerging from Anko's lips. She glanced behind her, one of them with his right hand held outwards with a swirling, blue ball of chakra pulsating and growing in his hand, and a second Naruto feeding it chakra, and chakra grew and spun rapidly, with visible streams of wind entering it as the two attackers flew straight down at Anko and her snake, drawing dangerously close. "Shit!" Anko growled, crouching and leaping off of her snake's head and into the air in time. "Shadow clones. And when in the hell did the Gaki learn that Tekken Rasengan?" Naruto growled, thrusting his attack forward and sending it into the back of the snake's head. The attack was devastating, a blast of swirling wind burning from friction and the force of the attack being so great that it shook the ground and causing the trees to blow violently in the wind. The snake hissed straight down into the earth, forced into it with a loud, splintering crash and a blast of dust clouds and debris. Anko gritted her teeth. Damn it! Huh? She looked behind her again, straining her neck to look upwards. She had almost forgotten about her other opponent's Sakura flying at her from above. Kunai in hand, and glowing blue with enhanced chakra, the girl let out a yell and lunged at the woman. Thrusting to blade and eat this, Sakura shouted. Anko growled and maneuvered in midair, twirling around with her own kunai in hand and batting Sakura's away. Directing it safely was then she spotted something out of the ordinary about Sakura's weapon. What the? She thought, seeing an unusual, improvised seal carved into the blade's side. It was when she realized what it was it too late. A puff of smoke shot out of the seal followed by a blur, and from that blur, Naruto shot out and straight moving at such a high speed that it would be impossible to avoid him. Anko growled and raised her kunai up, both of their weapons colliding with a clang. However, it wasn't Naruto's intention to lock blades with her head-to-head, as at his current level of skill he would be beaten in just a few minutes. Instead, he holding her in her place and pulled them together tightly. At the same time, both of them were now falling out of the sky. Anko grinned when Naruto rapped, "Ah, I didn't know you felt this way about me. Gaki?" Anko exclaimed. "You're pretty good with the ladies. Do you want to make out with me, too?" She teased Sakura and Ino. "Tempting, but no," Naruto exclaimed. Suddenly, Anko caught a whiff of another attacker's movements and glared behind her, where she saw Hinata leaping at her with 2 more tags. It took her as she got a better jump start from the ground, and was soon upon the purple-haired Jonin, whose eyes widened.
Achit, Anko mutard.
"We use cookies. By using our services, you acknowledge that you have read and accept our take this," Hinata shouted, slapping the 2 tags onto her back and leaping away. Naruto did so too, kicking off of Anko's stomach and backflipping away. WH crashed to the ground. As soon as she did, the 3 seals combined took effect, and the woman found herself zapped by high voltages of electricity. Her BSC the stunning effects of energy, and with a cry, collapsed to the ground when the seals took their full effect. Naruto, Sakura, and Hinata, amidst the rubble of the clearing, approached the woman and circled her, but were cautious at the same time. Forming a 3-ma looked down at her and watched her lie there, eyes closed and a clear sleeping expression on her face. Naruto removed her mask, all 3 of them blinking down at the woman. Is she dead?" Sakura asked. "I sure hope not," Hinata voiced, her Byakugan now deactivated and her hands held up to her chest. "Don't worry, she's all right," Naruto said with a smirk. "She's just unconscious, and judging from the seals, will be for the next hour or so." "So, what should we do with her?" Sakura asked, looking up at Naruto, who lowered his hood and put his mask away, his eyes and face back to normal. Both all right, and the childish smile was back on his face. Naruto grinned, glancing towards the 3 posts, the girl's eyes following his. "I have an idea." The 3 of them then grinned evilly down at the woman, and they quickly got to work. An hour later, Anko's eyes fluttered open as she awakened from her sleep, and she looked up. Trying to move, she found that her arms and legs were stiff, and unable to found to her bewilderment that she was tied up. Growling, she fought against her restraints to no avail, and eventually gave up when she found that their were her, courtesy, and Sakura and Hinata. The chain and cuffs was of course thanks to Naruto. "Sorry if it's a little uncomfortable." A voice spoke up in front of the woman, making her look up. When she did, she saw Naruto, Hinata, and Sakura sitting around ramen, dumplings, and other assorted goods, along with some tea, set out in front of them. Anko saw that it was Naruto who was speaking to her. "We didn't so we had to take some extra precautions." Sakura, looking up from her plate of sushi, smiled up at the woman. "Those tags you made were specifically designed, so they were supposed to knock you down out on the 3rd one. You should consider a different test, Anko-sensei. You underestimated us, and didn't expect us to attack you like that," Hinata exclaimed, taking a dumpling in. "Here you go, Hinata-chan," Naruto said, taking a pair of chopsticks and a dumpling and holding it up to the purple-haired Hyuga kneeling across from him. "Ah," Hinata responded, opening her mouth and being fed by the young ninja. Naruto grinned and turned to Sakura, holding up a piece of sushi for her. "Hey, Sakura-chan, open wide," Naruto exclaimed. Sakura smiled and opened her mouth, saying as well and taking the piece of sushi. She moaned at each them shared looks and laughed with each other, before looking towards Anko again. "So, Anko-sensei, how'd we do?" The woman, tied up, bound and unable to do anything, smiled at them and nodded, lowering her head humbly. You guys did exceptionally well. It was a real SL, just as a true genin team of Konoha would. You used your skills to the best of their abilities, and came up with a perfect strategy to overcome and obviously other students to be on my team than you three. She looked up at them with a grin. The three of them beamed, their faces brightening at this prospect. So, did we pass? Damn right you did, Anko exclaimed. Team 7 will be starting its first real mission tomorrow as the first and latest genin team of Kanahegakure. Yay! The three of them cheered, throwing their hands in the air. Now, could you three do something for me? Anko asked sweetly. Anything, sensei, Sakura said. Untie me and let me have some of that dango, her voice roared, using the infamous big head jutsu Irika was famous for. 3 weeks later, Naruto struggled valiantly against the lashing claws of the beast caught in his arms. He growled against fierce resistance, and muffled his ears as best to block was still deafened by them, but bit down tooth and nail to resist the screeches. But no matter how strong his mental endurance was against such an audible on eardrums, he could barely stand up against the razor-sharp talons of this creature. Try as he might, he could barely keep his grip as the monstrosity set upon H-break free against the arms attempting to pin it against the attacker and the ground. As much of a tussle, and as hard as it was, Naruto found it a lot easier to tame a wild falcon, eagle, and dog than this stupid cat. Arg, why you little rat? Naruto yelled, the cat's claws scraping across his face. That's it, he shouted, wrestling the brown, furry creature onto its stomach. Hinata watched from either side of him as he rolled around on the ground with the cat, giggling at the sight. You want to play sumo? Then let's play. The little cat, Tora, howled loudly and turned the tables for the 5th time, managing to end up on Naruto's chest, and was lashing angrily at his face. Naruto CR and trying to get it into a headlock. You'll pay for that, cat? Naruto cried out. That's dirty play.
No close.
This is Snake to Pinky. What is your status? Over. Anko's voice spoke up through the receivers in the group's ears. Sakura giggled, seeing Naruto once and try to throttle it, only to have the cat jump up onto his head and scratch his hair and forehead brutally. The pink-haired girl then turned and placed her fing to their team leader. This is Pinky to bitch. It's Snake. Brat! Anko shouted back, causing Sakura to wince at the screech in her earpiece. Sorry, Snigger. Snake, Sakura replied with a grin. She looked back at Naruto to see him continue struggling against the claws of the cat. Hinata was now help him remove the cat, despite its protests. We've caught the cat. Slippery little rascal. Please verify. Brown fur with a red bow around its right ear. Designa. That's the rat, Anko exclaimed. Geez, this is the 1127th time it's gotten away. Sakura's eyes widened. The 1127th time, the cat's managed to run away from its owners. Naruto and Hinata stopped struggling. With Naruto managing to coo him, he sat up, and he and Hinata looked at Sakura with widened eyes. What? The pair in the background shouted. Well, I've been keeping score. I've got a record booklet right here of all the missions ever undertaken. Every Jonin's got one, but they may tea anyway. This is the 1127th time the cat has managed to escape from its owner, Madame Shirjimi, Anko said. I had to chase the same little mon's been around since the very first Hokage. Really? Sakura asked, raising an eyebrow. It's got a heck of a lot more lives than 9. I can tell you that, Anko stated. A curse among ninja. It says in here it took Team Minato 7 Ho-Up Kakashi and Obito's faces more times than once. Slackers, Naruto called, the cat going back to scarring his hands. Its claws lashed at his hands and lighting fast, anime style, and Naruto bit his lip in a humoro gore. In less than 2 hours. Excellent. You just beat the old record by 5 minutes. Congratulations, brats, Anko exclaimed. Pack it up, we're heading on back. Stupid cat, cutting into my training, Naruto growled. Sakura smiled and pulled out the cage from the scroll they were given. Upon opening its lid, Naruto tried hell of a fight. After futility lashing away at Naruto's hands, placed its hands and legs at the 4 corners of the frame to the cage door, and held its place. Saku Naruto tried to push the cat in by force. They both growled at the effort, as the cat continued to protest against going into the cage. Come on, cat, Naruto growled. Get In there. He eventually managed to put it in, and Sakura quickly shut the cage. Naruto staggered back and fell to the floor in exhaustion, and watched as the cat flailed back away as he saw the cat trying to get out, and Sakura put the cage down, for fear of being scratched by its claws sticking out of the spaces between bar. "Put a seal on that damn thing," Naruto shouted, pointing a shaky finger at it. Hinata quickly did so, placing one at the top and at the door, and a small one around the lock. The three of them collapsed in exhaustion, with Naruto sprawling, "Ugh, I hate these missions." An hour later, the question of why the cat ran away from its owners over 1,000 times was soon answered when, as soon as the cat was returned to its owner at the Ms. Shirjimi, the fire daimyo's wife treated her cat, a fat woman, dressed in royalty, smothering the cat with hugs and kisses, almost suffocating it. Tears of anguish woman hugged her cat. Naruto, Sakura, Hinata, and Anko watched as the woman paid for the mission and left with her cat back in its cage. When the door closed, Sakura shook her H. "I kind of feel sorry for the little fellow. And Madame Shirjimi must take better care and consideration for her pets," Hinata explained. Naruto frowned. "Browse just in community forum betas we us." "Well, tough for it," the blonde said. He rubbed his right cheek, his hands, face and head noticeably wrapped in bandages and covered in band-aids. "Ow! Stew these scratches before I wrapped myself up." "Oh, I've got some ointment, Naruto-kun," Hinata exclaimed, holding out a bottle to the young man. Naruto looked towards her and smiled brightly. He grasped its herbal scent and nodding his head. "I made it myself. It should help. Thanks a lot, Hinata." "Urhem." The pair was interrupted by the Hokage, who cleared his throat to catch their attention. Sarutobi nodded to the team and smiled, seeing them line up hands in her pockets and a smirk on her face. "Excellent work, Team 7. I am really proud of you four for capturing and returning that the pet cat, setting the new record, Anko." He looked towards her. "What's the time?" Anko pulled out her booklet, Naruto, Sakura, and Hinata quickly moving over to her and craning their heads to see the times. They whistled at the number of T. "Let's see." Anko murmured. "Team 5, Team 21. Team Guy, yes. Team 7, consisting of Naruto Uzumaki, Sakura Haruno, and Hinata Hyuga. 1 hour, Phi slapped the book close, nearly hitting Sakura's nose. The woman and the team grinned over at the Hokage, except Hinata, who merely smiled proudly. "Read it wonderful," the Hokage exclaimed. "As an added bonus for breaking the record, I will add an extra 30% to your mission pay." "Well done." Sakura and Hinata high-fived with each other and Naruto knocked knuckles with Anko. "What time did you get, Aji-san?" Naruto asked. "When you were on Team Tobirama?" The Hokage rubbed the back of his head and hid as much of his expression under the shadow of his funny hat as much as possible. My team got 2 seconds. The cat managed to cross the borders into Kumogakure. That was our best time." Naruto, Sakura, Hinata, and Anko stared at the Hokage sitting behind the desk silently for the next several seconds. Even Irika and some of the other staff also gaped at the Hokage. After the few seconds had passed, and Naruto tried to contain his laughter, he just let it out, holding his gut and trying to maintain his STA Hokage, with Sakura and Anko joining in, and Hinata in a fit of giggles on the side. Even Irika had to shove a fist in his mouth to stop himself from laughing. "Ha ha 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 ha," Naruto laughed. "TT, that's ha ha ha, priceless. Ga ha 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 ha." "Shut up. That cat has been trouble since before you were even born. It nearly started a war between Konohagakure and Kumogakure," Sarutobi exclaimed, ground, with Sakura and Anko nearly falling to the ground, laughing. Kumogakure demanded a public execution for the furry demon, as it tormented the Rai scare his wife. His wife was allergic to cats. "We managed to avoid a war when we agreed to split the bill between Kumo and Konoha for capturing the cat on Tage." This only seemed to add fuel to the already raging fire, and now Sakura was on the ground laughing. The laughter carried on for another minute or so, before eventually everyone calmed down and, with sore guts, everyone was on their feet again and paying tea. "Sorry, Hokage-sama," Anko said, wiping a tear away from under her eye. "Please, carry on." "Of course," Sarutobi Hiruzen replied, a tick mark visibly seen on his head. Clearing his throat, he held up a scroll and began reading out the missions received are as follow. They consist of several simple D-rank missions: walking the dogs from the local store, mowing the Fire Lord's lawn, getting a few kites out of his building over the past few weeks, and it looks a bit messy. Requirements are to return them to their owners, and whoa, hold the phone, Aji-san. No way, Naruto shouted, crossing his arms in front of him dramatically. I'm not doing one more D-rank mission on that scroll. Anko sighed and folded her arms too. To be honest, I agree with the Gaki Hokage-sama, she stated. Sakura nodded her head in agreement, a frown appearing on her face. All these D-rank missions are putting us off. We need to at least work out and put our Hinata shrugged. Hands held up and fingers laced together. I am not that fussed. Sarutobi sighed and shook his head. Goodness, these 4 are going to make me bald. Puedi puis Aji-san, Naruto said, pouting cutely, with Sakura doing the same. Puedi puis, they said at the same time. All right, stop that, Sarutobi groaned, pulling out a random scroll from the C-rank pile. Okay, here is a lucky draw. The old Hokage tossed it over to 1 C-rank mission. You and 2 other genin teams are to escort Miss Haru Hashimoto back to her country village in the north, the land of bamboo reeds. S and the lands, but has been brought here for protection due to an unfortunate uprising. Now that the uprising has been quelled, she has been called back to Ri. What do you say? Hell yeah, Naruto exclaimed, pumping his fist. Huosha! Sakura also shouted, giving Naruto a high five. The 2 of them grinned to each other. Hinata smiled and looked at Naruto. This'll be exciting, huh, Naruto-kun? Yeah, it will be, Naruto replied. Well, there we go, Anko said, pocketing the scroll. What other teams do you want me to bring on this mission, Hokage-sama? Offer the positions to Team Asuma and Team Kakashi to accompany your team on this mission, the Hokage said. Kiba and Sasuke have been arguing for a sea experience outside of the village walls. Perhaps you can bring Kurinai for assistance. Yes, Hokage-sama, Anko exclaimed with a smile. But just before they were about to leave, a new voice shot up from Team 7, making everyone stop in their tracks. Wait a second, Sakura shouted, waving her hands in front of her. Why do we need so many teams on this mission if it's just a C-rank mission segment from our overall shinobi force? Sarutobi raised an eyebrow, finding the question quite surprising. He chuckled and rubbed the back of his head. Well, you may not like it if I told you, youngsters, the old man said. Go on, fill us in, Naruto exclaimed, standing beside Sakura for support. Yes, please do, Hinata said, also accompanying Sakura on her other side. The Hokage sighed and rubbed his forehead. Very well then, here goes. An hour or so later, Wada away it! Naruto's yell echoed throughout the village, scaring the birds out of the trees and causing the Inuzuka dogs to howl at the Sakura, and Hinata giggled as they watched Naruto stare, gawking at the Jiao. The Jiao, or litter, is a human-powered transport that requires the service of 2 portable room, either covered or not, by holding the poles at their sides or on their shoulders. This one was a bed-sized one with a futon, and was encased in doors. The elegant red veils over it concealed the royally designed view windows on the sides, front and back. Inside it sat the silhouette of the young woman. I don't believe this, Naruto shouted. It's barbaric, I'll say. My goodness, Anko said, placing her hand on her chest in mock shock. How can the Hokage make you endure such awful and brutal torture? The W, you'll be one of the first to carry it. Naruto let out one of the loudest and biggest groans in his life, which Sakura laughed to and patted him on the back sheepishly. Don't worry, Naruto-kun, she said. This way, at least you'll be getting some good exercise. Naruto's face fell at this, and a sweat drop appeared on his head. Anko grinned and poked Sakura in shoulder, hard, which made her rub the spot to ease the jab. Don't you go teasing him, Pinky, Anko said, 'cause you're taking over after the first 3 miles. This time, Sakura deflated, and her face fell. Hinata just shook her head at the pair, and they simultaneously hung their heads in shame and disappointment. So, when can we get moving? The voice of the woman from inside her human transport carrier asked. Her voice was delicate and soft, matching the tone and from the outside world. I am most eager to get back to my village. It's been so long. Anko and the 3 genin waiting turned towards the Jiao, the jonin blinking in surprise before smiling at the silhouette. Such manners, she exclaimed, folding her arms over her chest. Don't worry, when the other teams get here, we'll move out. Don't worry, ma'am, you'll be very well, The woman replied before silence fell. The members of Team 7 waited patiently with their bags and their job. Naruto going to stand by his side of the jiao, and Sakura and Hinata talking about differ using palm oils. During this time, Anko pulled out a particular orange book and, with her back turned to her students, began reading and enjoying it. It didn't take long for Team Asuma and Kurenai Yuhi to meet the team at the gates, with Ino, Choji, and Shikamaru going to join their respective friends. Ino-jo began an animated discussion about boys, whereas Shikamaru and Choji shared some quality time with Naruto beside the carriage. "Hey there, Kurenai," Anko greeted the family raven-haired woman. "How's it going?" "It's all right," the woman replied, hands on her hips. Asuma pulled up alongside her, also waving. "Hey, Anko." "Hey!" The woman looked between the two, studying them closely and placing a finger on her chin in thought. The two blinked as the woman looked between T knew from experience with her friend that she was deducing something between her and Asuma, and that was not good. Anko-chan? All right, spill it. You two are going out, aren't you?" Anko said, poking Asuma in the chest. "Come on, buddy. Don't just stand there blushing and gawking. I know with each other. My eyes don't play tricks on me, and neither does my watch. Unless my binoculars are designed to be optical illusional. A couple of nights ago, your house. Doing things that only a couple would do. Knock. Anko. Shush." Kurenai shot out a hand, clasping it over her friend's mouth and wearing an expression in a fashion similar to when Naruto was in an anime threatening. Catching Anko by the mouth with her hand, shutting her up, Kurenai looked behind her to see their students staring at them, apparently having B and Kurenai being together, or something. Seeing that they'd stopped, the students returned to their own devices, while Kurenai rounded on Anko, "Looking rat not to spy on me and Asuma," she hissed. Anko took a moment to think, eyes looking upward and finger to her chin. She blinked as she thought, before looking back at Kurenai and grinning nervously. 27th, Kurenai hissed, looking over at Asuma, who was standing there, cigarette hanging loosely from his mouth and face as red as a tomato. "You," Asuma shrugged. "Don't ask me. I'm no good in solving arguments when we're clearly backed up into a corner." "Ugh," Kurenai deadpanned, before glaring back at Anko. "Breathe a word of this to Kakashi or anyone else, and I promise you the next genjutsu I use on you the rest of your life." Anko smirked. "Not possible." "Why not? I know you. You're not as twisted as me." "Oh yeah." As the argument and later discussion of the mission continued on, we are moved back around to the boys group over by the jiao. Shikamaru, Choji, and Naruto slowly began to feel that perhaps this was what it was like to actually have friends that stay by your side for real, even against their parents' wishes. And loyalty. "You see, I always did like regular pork with rice, you know, the red one, but add it with the juice sauce from stay to the rice, and add a side of wonton noodles there," Choji exclaimed, rubbing his stomach and licking his lips. "Boy, I could go for some of that now." Naruto also licked his lips, folding his arms and leaning against the side of the jiao. "Yeah. Boy, that looks God in my head. Either that, ramen, or women," Shikamaru pointed out casually, though it looked like he didn't mean it in a joking way. Choji just chuckled, while Naruto glared against his headband. He thrust his fist at the boy, teeth gritted. "Who asked you?" "I only assumed." "Well, Mr. Fortune Teller, maybe you can tell me how many seconds there are between now and when my fist connects with your lower jaw." "You won't do it." "You think I won't?" "I know you won't." "Yeah. Aha. Arg." Naruto growled, pounding the side of his head with his palm. After doing that a couple of times, he poked an exaggerated declaration his way, jabbing Shikamaru lean back a tad bit. "You're pushing it, buddy. Do you want to die young?" "Meh." Shikamaru shrugged. Naruto then grinned and patted him on the shoulder. "Hey, I'm just joking." Shikamaru shrugged and smiled. "I knew you were all along. You're too easy to read." "Heh, that's why he can beat you at shogi any day?" Choji exclaimed, pulling out a packet of kettles and beginning to munch on them. Naruto deadpanned, the animated, freak show expression. "What was that?" Naruto heard a giggle behind him and turned towards the jiao he had been leaning against. He blinked, trying to peer through the veil and see whether however, incapable of being able to see through it, he shrugged and turned back to the pair, who also became a bit puzzled at the giggle. Unbeknownst to them, peered through the window and at the spiky-haired blonde. "Oh, about time," Anko groaned, throwing her arms into the air when she saw Team Kakashi walking down the road towards them. She sighed and placed her train such a slacker. "Hey all," Kakashi said, waving with his right hand. while his left hand was preoccupied with his book. Sasuke, Kiba, and Shino also waved. The three boys' MOV shook hands as he greeted Naruto, Choji, and Shikamaru, and Sasuke just hung back with Shino. Shino, however, did greet Hinata and Shikamaru on his own tea called to gather around the Jonin, once they had discussed the mission with each other. Anko took the stand, as she had been the one to receive the full mission specs. "All right, you filthy, disgusting, repulsive, weak maggots," Anko began in her military march tone of voice. "Our mission today is a standard escort and bodygu to escort Mistress Haru Hashimoto back to her capital village, in the land of bamboo reeds. We will alternate between groups of who gets to carry the Mistress protective perimeter around the convoy. If any obstacles, the most likely we may encounter will be mercenaries and highway robbers. Nothing more. We have educational purposes. Learn from experience. You hear me?" There was silence at first, as the genin stared at Anko, leaning back a bit as if she were some sort of giant loudspeaker booming at them. "And this psycho is your teacher?" Kiba whispered to Naruto. The blonde's hair spiked up and he clamped a hand over his mouth quickly. "SHHHH. Don't let her hear you. Seriously, this woman scares me," Ino said, trembling a bit on the spot. "PFT, you don't know the half of it," Sakura replied. "This is going to be a real drag," Shikamaru groaned. This'll be interesting," Shino murmured to himself, followed by Sasuke humph of agreement. "All right, Kakashi, Asuma, Kurenai, you get to pick out the remaining 3 genin that can carry the mistress," Anko said to the senseis behind her. "The 3 Okiba." Kakashi pointed, while the Inuzuka deadpanned. "Shikamaru, you're up," Asuma pointed. "I knew it. It's a drag," Shikamaru thought. "Sasuke, get going," Kurenai said. "All right," the Uchiha murmured, walking over to join the selected group. Slowly but surely, the 4 genin lifted the jiao onto their shoulders, adding on extra weight to their bags, and of course to the leg and wrist weights. Naruto W. Everyone was in formation. Anko led them on through the gates, grinning and obviously looking cheerful, with Asuma and Kurenai bringing up behind her and fell behind. "Let's move it, troops." Later that day, the group had stopped at a small stream somewhere on the northern-east edge of the Land of Fire, close to the borders of the country. They had placed the J. Kakashi and Sasuke standing guard around the shade. The others were scattered around the place, sitting, standing, or resting under trees. Kurenai was sitting discussion, while Ino was with her 2 teammates, with Shikamaru coming up with different tactics they could use for their Ino-Shikacho combinations. Kiba perched in the tree above them talking to a leaf insect, and Asuma standing close by to Kurenai, keeping watch on the other side of the clearing. Naruto and S sandals off and feet in the water. The pair was engrossed in sights and sound of the land around them. Sakura's hand on top of Naruto's as the water gently flowed past their feet, and the breeze Sakura sighed. "It's beautiful, isn't it? The sky." "Yeah," Naruto exclaimed, glancing over at her. He watched as Sakura moved a hand through her long, flowing pink hair, and looked back at him. Seeing his smile, the girl giggled and pushed him lightly. "You're so sweet, Naruto-kun." Naruto grinned sheepishly at her, and Sakura couldn't help but blush at his look. What is it?" I'm sorry. If I ever hit you, or yelled at you, or hurt you in any way, just because you were trying to help me or be nice to me." Sakura looked away. "Sham mistakes. Because I was wrapped too much in a stupid crush, clouded my better judgment, blinding me so much that I couldn't see you for who you are, Sakura-chan. I've been nothing but a moron, a weakling." Sakura looked up at him, seeing his eyes staring considerately at her. I've been stupid." "You're not stupid, Sakura-chan," Naruto said, reaching up and running the back of his hand down her cheek. Before brushing a few strands of hair behind, Sakura smiled and placed her hand on his. "I don't want to make any more then." Naruto grinned at her and was about to say something else, but the two were interrupted by a shadow casting over them from behind. They looked around and over her chest, and looking at them with a sinister grin. "Getting cozy, are we? Huh?" Sakura looked a little taken aback and blushed at the realization of her and Naruto's position. She quickly got up and slipped on her sandals. "Hey there, Ino-chan," Naruto exclaimed, earning a smile and a wink from said girl. "Hi there, Naruto-kun," Ino replied, using a new nickname she developed for him. She then lunged at him and wrapped her arms around him in a hug, placing H surprise. "Did you miss me? I haven't seen you in weeks." Naruto grinned in response, a little bit nervous, while Sakura fumed in the background. Of course I missed you, Ino-chan. Hee. I'm glad. Get off of him, pig! Sakura shouted, yanking Ino off of the boy's back roughly. Ino tried to fight back in process, but ended up accidentally pushing Naruto in splash. Both girls gasped and looked over to see if he was okay, and found to their surprise and amusement that Naruto was sitting in the shallow water, soaked and his shirt, and a lily pad on his shoulder. It was a pretty humorous sight which prompted the two girls to laugh, followed by Naruto. Behind them, the other genin and jonin looked on with either smiles or interest, while the eyes of the girl from inside the jiao looked on from behind her veils. All right, kids, let's get moving again, Anko shouted, ending their break. We've still got a lot of ground to cover, and there is a possibility we might be setting you once again. The teams were up and running, gathering up their gear and their person they were assigned to protect. They then, once again, began hiking. This clones doing the heavy lifting, while the ones who previously carried it were escorting. Over hills and through forests they hiked, through fields, past farms, past small villages, cottages, and over the horizon they traveled. The clouds above moved the group feel at peace. But as they journeyed further and further into unknown territory, they began to feel a bit less at ease, yet couldn't contain their excitement. This is great. I can't wait to see this village, Kiba exclaimed, thrusting his fist out. First time outside of the borders of Fire Country. Wouldn't you say? Akama the dog resting in his jacket yipped happily and sniffed the fresh air. You said it? Choji agreed, while munching on a bag of thins, humming happily to itself. I really want to try out the buffets there, the exotic meat dishes. Veg licked his lips in anticipation. I can taste the sweet dessert now. How about you, Naruto? You looking forward to touring the village later on? Kiba called over. Naruto murmured, hands at his sides as his eyes moved from left to right, looking for any signs of an enemy or strange obstacle. This response sort of hauling the princess and her jiao looking between one another before glancing back at the boy, who was leading them behind Kakashi, Kurenai, and Anko. The boy sweated nervously as he walked, his eyes scaling the woods and catching the scent of an upcoming village just over the next horizon. His senses were hardened jonin who knew to expect anything around the next bend. He had a really bad feeling at the pit of his stomach. Kakashi, who had switched places with Asuma so that he could bring up the rear, detected the usually boisterous boy's lack of delight, and decided to investigate. A man reading the orange book looked down at Naruto with concern. Are you okay, Naruto? He asked. You seem a little on edge. Is something the matter? Nothing, Kakashi-sensei, Naruto replied, looking up at the silver-haired jonin with his unmasked face. The older shinobi was met with the cold eyes of Naruto look he received, which was one of a painful past, before watching the boy speed up in his walk. I don't really want to talk about it. I've been to this area before Kakashi sighed when the boy left his side and shook his head. Hell if I saw that look before, he mumbled. Having seen Naruto's true nature a couple of times, Anko looked back a bit, seeing Naruto dip his head a little and lift his hood over his head, so that his eyes became overshadowed. This was a clear sign to her when to trust Naruto's reactions. She nodded her head and looked back towards the convoy. Everybody stay sharp, she called out. No dilly-dallying until we reach the next village. As they journeyed on up the path running up the side of the steep hill, Sakura, Ino, and Hinata were still engrossed in their previous conversation about the bow reached this next horizon. Their talk had escalated a little more into something a tad bit extreme for their ages. Kakashi and Kurenai were fortunate to be listened but smirk at the prospects had with this conversation. So, what do you think about your teammates, Ino? Sakura asked, sizing up her friend and rival's expression with one of her own curious ones. You seem to, why yes. You three seem to be very cooperative with each other, Hinata exclaimed brightly. You all seem to be the best of friends. TSK. Heck if I know, Ino said, shrugging. We get along fine for sure, but I feel that we need to get our act together a little bit more. You know, we may have missions that require hard thinking, but we need more action and brawn to back that up. What are you talking about? Sakura replied, making a point with her hand gestures. You've seen Choji, the guy's a powerhouse. Your team has plenty of M, but when it comes down to just us three, we're really shorthanded, Ino explained. Sure, Choji is strong and all, but as far as action goes, there's not a noog not, and Choji aimlessly follows him into it. Okay then, Sakura said, but what about a more personal opinion, aside from them as being A-grade slackers? Personally? Ino replied, giving this more thought and swaying her body with the movements required. That's all, I guess. Even though I have to keep them all their great potential as a team and as individual shinobi, I don't think they can even compete with Naruto. The girl clapped her hands together and looked and stars in her eyes. He's such a dreamer. Kiba, who was standing a bit to the right and back, was within earshot of this. When he heard it, he broke down in sniggers. Naruto-kun is not an object for you to ogle at, Ino-chan, Hinata protested. He's a good, kind friend, and he will do anything to make sure you're okay and anything. Ino said, a smirk growing on her face. Well, I'd trade places with you any day, just to go out on missions with him. Can you imagine it? More very little or no authority, and no parents. Think of the possibilities. Sakura and Hinata were almost appalled by the way Ino was speaking, causing Sakura to slap her over the back of her head. You pig, we're not even 16, hey, give me a break. Ino shot back. I can't help it if my mind likes to wander. I mean, look at him. Most of the time Naruto's not even wearing a shirt under until only a few weeks ago. Check him out. He's practically dripping with sex appeal. Naruto's not an object, Hinata stated again. Don't tell me you don't like looking up and down that big piece of meat. Eh? Ino whispered to her. Come on, admit it. You like to look at him too when he's in. Hinata flushed brightly and looked away quickly to hide her embarrassment. And no, I don't. How can you say such a thing? Ino grinned triumphantly. Ah, knew it. Still, it is indecent of you to think of him that way. Well, maybe not if it's just a little, Sakura added, blushing heatedly as well as her own thoughts started to betray her. She didn't give it much time either. Well-built Naruto was underneath that jacket. She had seen him without his mesh shirt before, and it started to make her feel funny. Blushing, she glanced over at him, seeing his back to them. He's definitely not like Sasuke. He's much more built since he focuses a lot more on physical exer. And how would you know that? Sakura-chan? Ino asked, smirking at her friend. Sakura stumbled a bit and glared at the girl, fist raised. That's none of your business. Sure, then you won't mind if I cover up that hole in the sidewall to the men's hot springs then. What? Kakashi's sweat dropped, while Kurenai just shook her head. As the conversation between the girls continued on, Kiba was still sniggering, wanting to eavesdrop, little disappointed that they had stopped comparing guys and were just talking about Naruto. A little further down the convoy, Sasuke was idling back casually, attention to the conversations going on, although he did exchange a few words with the Naruto clone carrying one of the rear poles of the Jiao, balancing its W. Do your teammates always talk so loud? Sasuke asked, slightly annoyed at the laughs and shouts he heard from the girls, though the details to him were Ina, one is usually quiet, the other I get along really well with, the clone replied. I think it's when the girls get together they're loud. There's a stereotypical view of things, the Uchiha replied. Says you? Naruto shot back. HN. Oh, don't stop because of me, Choji said to them from ahead. I like where this conversation is going. You just focus on carrying. Your side is leaning, and I hate having to try and balance it out. And my feet are starting to hurt, the clone shouted and groaned. The convoy trudged on further, till they reached the top of the hill they were climbing. As soon as they gathered at the top, they looked down towards the Valle here. They saw a seaside village amidst a thick forest of trees, built along the beach front, where a vast array of piers stood built. It was a colorful town with our distance for an outskirt port. As trees-covered mountains stretched high on the horizon, with the beach weaving and disappearing into them, the group could as fresh sea air whipped at their faces, and they could hear the distant caws of seagulls. It was at this point, as the shinobi gazed out across the land in awe and interest, Naruto finally recognized the village and frowned. He looked up at the Jonin senseis also admiring the scenery, and spoke in a very serious tone of voice. We have to go around. The 4 Jonin present looked down at him in surprise. Why so, Naruto? Asuma asked. This isn't a village for us to go through, Naruto stated, looking back down towards it. Shinjo Port, a pirate town. A pier where travelers come and go, Merce Market thrives amidst the chaos of everyday life. I really detest this place. How do you know this? Kurenai asked curiously. Have you been here before? I came here with Erosenin once on one of his trips, Naruto stated. For an 8-year-old, this wasn't a town I wanted to be in. The markets, the drugs. See few slave traders when I went off on my own. They thought I was another orphan to kidnap. I see, Asuma replied, looking back down. Either way, we can just go around the edge of town and keep away from the markets. We need to rent an inn. I wouldn't recommend it, Naruto muttered, turning on his heel and walking away, back to the carriage. His friends watched as he disappeared behind the jiao. They watched the boy sit himself down on the rock to listen and wait for a decision to be made. We can't let our client spend a night here, Anko said, furrowing her brow. In light of these circumstances, I say we just move on through, get some supplies out of the town. I agree, Kakashi said, looking at Kurenai and Asuma. Besides, I think the locals will take far too much interest in a convoy moving a person of royalty through. Kurenai and Asuma nodded. Turning, they relayed their instructions to the genin. All right, you lot, let's get moving, Anko said. We're going to go through the town. Do not talk to the locals and try not to wander off. I'd hate to have to be Biu, the woman muttered, hands in her pockets, and began making her way down the hillside. The genin moved back into formation, this time allowing Sakura, Ino, Hinata, and Shikamaru to carry the jiao again, while the rest of them formed a protective, made sure to stick closer to them this time, while Anko took the lead. While they moved down at the hill, Naruto shook his head and rubbed his nose with his F. I'm starting to regret arguing with Aji-san for this mission, Naruto mumbled. Upon arriving at the bottom of the hill and at the front gates of town, the group entered in through one of the many access points, which looked disturbingly SI with a few major differences. Number 1, the buildings were much more colorful and suited the description as more of a Western European design of village. Were paved and more open to civilians, and street lamps, oil lanterns apparently, blended into the 1920s look of this backwater town. The scent of fish, markets, and foul play was immediately picked up by the would-be travelers, the jonin looking around with expressions of focus and seriousness around a hidden kunai in their pockets at all times, whereas Asuma was clenching one of his trench knives. The rest of the genin were also on high alert, sped, eyes hidden away. Sasuke and Shino appeared emotionless as usual, Choji and Kiba anxious, with Akamaru, who was getting a little sketchy and on edge, their charge, and Kurenai kept a close watch on their students. The moment they entered this place, they immediately felt a change in the air. Though a majority of people walking around minded their own business, such a purpose, there were however some in the shadows giving the group strange and considerate looks. Even those armed were staring at them. However, neither the nation's soldiers on patrol. Still, if the opportunity came, there was a possibility that they would make a move. Keeping away from the buildings and to the center of the road, the group of shinobi moved on. Well, at least there is some security here, Kurenai said. That's a welcome change, Naruto muttered. But don't feel too at ease just because there are law enforcers, Kakashi spoke up. A lot of the guards you see walking around work for some powerful organ codes. The real soldiers, a part of the country's security and army, are dressed in armor, see. The jonin said, pointing out a marching patrol walking in perfect, more distinguishable outfit that designated him as the group's company. The members of Team 7, 8, and 10 watched the soldiers march by them. The civilians noticed another group of supposed soldiers walking with the crowd. This group dressed more casually with their own form of clothing, but wore pauldrons, band's separate security force. They were also heavily armed like the guards, and maintained order in the streets. Those other ones work for clans powerful enough to own their own security force. But in these times, they remain as one nation, Anko stated. But why establish their personal security forces? Sakura asked. I mean, wouldn't the head village or leader of this nation fight against this build-up in an op? This is more of a lawless part of the country, kid, Asuma explained. In spite of the country's security forces, they are like a toothless tiger now, without a PR anymore, thus prompting other organizations and former political advisors to squabble over the bits and pieces left for the picking from the downfall of the coup security for their own safety, in case a civil war broke out. They run the country together alongside criminals and organization leaders who are taking advantage. But once the mistress is returned to her home village and takes charge, will everything change then? Ino asked. Probably, Shikamaru replied. But it'll take a while till this country is back on its feet. Once law and order is properly established, you can bet that these cockroaches will run off and hide, and continue their business dealings elsewhere. Sasuke, other side of the jiao.
No offense, Chino.
None taken, the boy replied, hands in his pockets. They continued walking on through the crowd, as the area thickened with the scent of markets. Even keeping to the edge of town was proving a little too tricky. The crowds became more packet, and the noise from these crowds grew more and more. It was after a few more minutes of walking through the thick-aired, edge of the small market district, which opened up at a central roundabout and a large one. The buildings moved around it, plenty of space to build another a damaged fountain in the center, and carriages. They team saw the place was loaded with people purchasing and browsing through stuff at the stands, and autocratic-like figures, as well as mercenary at separate stands making bids. At these separate, darker booths, the crowds were grouped beside carriages towed by horses. These carriages had caged wind flanked by their equally heavily armed guards. Most of these security figures looked more like the described separate security organizations forces, but were merchandise within the perimeter of guards, and what the rich, wealthy, and other merchants were looking to purchase were what looked to be prisoners, ordinary people, together and dressed in rags. It looked like a chain gang than anything else, only these people were exhausted and beaten, obviously starved, and put on sal specializing in this department. At the very sight of this, the Jonin averted a little to the left, keeping away from the carriages and the people. The genin couldn't help but look, with many in the group rather bewildered at the sight. "Are those prisoners?" Hinata asked. "No, they're slaves," Naruto replied darkly, glaring at the carriages as they moved around the crowd, who were screaming bids on the people they had lined. "You people have goods to buy and sell." "That's horrible," Ino murmured. "I'll say," Kiba growled, to which Akamaru gladly enforced with his own as they watched the salesman auction off another two of these chain-up girls to a satis-off. "How can they? Trading of human lives. It's sickening. This is what happens in countries without a proper leadership," Shikamaru commented. "Unlawful behavior, illegal shipping and trading occur," Asuma evaluated, the group stopping for a brief pause. "You're looking at a city that is undergoing a STA thing happens. It even occurred in many of the hidden villages as well, during and after the Great Shinobi Wars. Most of the villages managed to rebuild quick, mostly due to their still existing leadership that was in power. But those countries and villages with the leadership decimated, and left to pick up the pieces on broken, poor, homeless, and helpless. Without authority, in a world thriving with mongrels, divided clans, and criminal organizations, you see the country deteriorate. It's been like this for years now," Anko noted. "With little thanks to us and to the remaining security forces still loyal to the Hashimoto family, they kept this peace. The people, however, are still losing their homes, families, and jobs, thanks to a leader not being able to take charge and command the people." Kakashi butted change. A couple of the genin looked at the jiao that Miss Haru Hashimoto was sitting in, watching the silhouette peer out the veiled and protected windows. My people have survived on their own long enough." They heard her speak. "I cannot let my village or this country fall into chaos and war. As soon as I am BA this town, I give you my solemn vow." The Jonin nodded and, with their genin teams, continued on. The convoy was up and on the move again, pushing through the crowds and easing out of the M area. Happy to get out of sight of those slave traders, the group could finally tread more carefully out of sight of any mercenaries, thieves, robbers of pesky minutes. Since entering this area, Sakura, who had become more alert with the grouping and presence of the teams, looked around to check and make sure if someone was missing. "Hey, where's Naruto?" she asked. Anko's head shot around. "Shit." Naruto was looking through the crowds, passing several weapons-selling stands as he forced his way to the front of the slave traders. When he did, he scooted stopping here, close to the back. He saw a lot of the slaves out of the carriage, most of them still chained up and in a line that led around to the front. Still in the carriage, they were transported here. Judging from the spaces, it was definitely not comfortable for them. Here around the back, behind the auctioneer and outside of the crowd, the genin walked around, hands in his pockets and eyes glaring with distaste at their private market. He watched as a separate salesman led a rich autocrat flanked by bodyguards round the carriage, allowing him to inspect their stock. He containing some of the slaves, and not too far from the carriage. Naruto walked up to one of the smaller ones at the foot of the carriage, this one containing a lone orphan, and crouched down next to it. This slave was Shen of her cage. She had silky, raven black hair, though a little dirty and messy, and was younger than the spiky-haired genin. Quietly sitting in her holding, dirty, she could do was sit there and ignore the hungry pains in her stomach. It was a deeply upsetting sight to see a girl as young as her in a state like this, this area. When the girl felt the presence of someone next to her cage, she looked up through her long, black locks and gasped when she saw the stranger. Her response boy, chains rattling. She nearly hurt herself in her haste. The young ninja held out his hand to her. Hey, it's all right. I'm not one of them. I'm not going to hurt you. Can I help you, young man?" The voice of a man spoke up behind Naruto, the genin standing up and spinning around. He met the face of a stout man with a really strange hat with a cotton ball on the end of it. He wore basic, casual clothes suiting his profession, and yellow and black, striped slacks. Naruto was Abu taller, and had to look down a bit to meet the man eye to eye. "See anything you like from our stocks, sir?" Naruto growled and pointed accusingly at him. "Thing? These are people you are selling. They are not just worthless products, goods, or objects. This is sick." Cage behind him. "How can you keep her in here? You can't even stand up in this cage. And on top of that, she looks half-starved." "My boy, please calm down." The man eased him, looking a little worried at his outburst. The salesman was also slightly taken aback at the look of pure anger had taken. "I'm just trying to make a living here. I apologize, but this is the best we can do to keep these people well-fed and in good health on our budget." "Usparimi," Naruto said, looking back down at the girl looking up at them. The poor child had become terrified at the argument and had backed away into the corner of the cage, staring up at the yellow-haired boy with fear, and was TR had parted a little, allowing Naruto to get a good look at her eyes. It was with this glance. Naruto gasped and swooped down onto the cage again, causing the girl to jump slightly at his movement. He grasped the rusty bars of her. "And no, it can't be." Looking into the orphan girl's eyes, the boy saw distinctive rings with a light purple shade in her irises. These rings rippled out of a center pupil, and from NR knew what these eyes were. Rinnegan? But how? Naruto thought in shock. The Sage of Six Paths was the only one who possessed them. Yet, this child. "Listen, son, if you're not interested in buying, then I suggest you leave before the guards come around and decide to shove you into one of these cages. The M can, or fall into line like the rest of us. It's how we survive here, and to work and slave, and become someone's object for their sick, twisted desires is how these people are destined to survive." Naruto growled. I refused to turn towards the man, pulling out a brown bag from his pouch and holding it out to him. "I'll take her." The man held out his hands and took the bag. Opening it, the bearded man gasped when he saw the gold coins shining and glittering from inside of it. Amount add up to purchase a horse. He looked up at the boy, seeing him glaring at him. "Are you sure, sir?" the man asked. "She may be young, but her eyes are a little strange. Maybe something." "No, this one is fine," Naruto stated. The man smiled and bowed. "Thank you, sir," the man replied, quickly pulling out a key from his pocket. He let her out and undid her chains so that she could much so that she fell, only to be caught by Naruto. The boy lifted her up and glared at the salesman. "Do yourself a favor and quit to redeem yourself," Naruto said, walking away and carrying the girl with him. The man watched the young shinobi strode into Think. Naruto pushed himself out of the crowd, forcefully, ignoring everything else, and followed the chakra signals of his shadow clones carrying the jiao, and headed was about to leave the marketplace. He suddenly bumped into a familiar face. He stopped by the side of the archway and looked to his left, where he saw Ankh folded and eyes closed. When she looked back at Naruto, she looked disappointed, but at the same time filled with a sense of pride. "You know, you shouldn't wander off on your own in a place like this," Anko said. "Like you said, a lot of bad eggs." "I never said that," Naruto replied, looking up at her with his pained, dead man's look, with that exhausted expression in play. "I said this place was Kami's ass because I knew he'd send a bolt of lightning down at me for saying something like that. All that can reach me here is his farts and his fingers to scratch his ass." Anko sniggered and got off of the "yeah," Naruto said, looking down at the girl to see that she had her eyes closed and was sleeping. She looked very peaceful, snoozing in his arms. Her breathing could fully mask her wounds, the cuff marks on her wrists, and her physical fatigue. "I couldn't leave her in there. Not in a cage only big enough for a dog." "So I saw," Anko replied, looking up at his face. "What are you going to do with her?" "She can come and live with me when we get back to Konohagakure." "Sounds like a good plan," Anko said, patting him on the shoulder and leading him the rest of the way out of the market square. "You sure you've got enough, M? I've got enough to support a whole family for the rest of my life," Naruto stated, smiling up at Anko. "You'd be surprised how much I get around and earn at T, really? What's your annual salary?" "About a 1,000 ryo a day if I were to split a bill between hours," Naruto said. "I usually take up high-bid jobs, but that's on a need-to-know basis." "Gotcha," Anko said with a nod. The two of them now walking down the road the shinobi convoy had gone down. in the time Anko had taken to find Naruto, and was bound to have left town already. Unbeknownst to the pair, as they walked down a now emptier street, a figure, dressed in a cloak with a hood over their head, and a white mask with a blue fire leading out from the right eye hole, was watching them from the shadows of a tea house next to an inn they had just passed. They didn't even notice the figure in at the person's side. About 11 feet in length with a thick blade, wrapped in white gauze straps. Furthermore, on the forehead of the mask, was the symbol of the village hidden in the mist, with a gash scarred into it. Setting the tea down, the figure looked up, watching as the two shinobi went down the road and out of sight. Kanahagakure